Chapter 1758. When everyone heard Luo Fan's words, they all had an inexplicable look on their faces. Some were confused, some were at a loss, some were deep in thought, and some were even slightly angry. It was obvious that they did not know what Luo Fan's intentions were. Only an existence like the Realm King would have an inexplicable feeling. He began to search through his own memories, looking for any hidden dangers that might exist. The memory-severing technique was so profound that the memories it targeted weren't the ordinary memories that existed in their hearts at all. Instead, they targeted the higher-level memories. To us, what is a higher level of memory? The Realm King pondered. Finally, his eyes narrowed, and a thought flashed in his mind that made him tremble. True sage. Only true sages are memories of a higher level than ordinary memories. Thinking of this, all kinds of inspiration emerged in his mind. All kinds of inexplicable sounds that had always existed in his memories but had been ignored by him appeared in his mind. As a cultivator of the same generation as the primeval Lord of Heaven, the Realm King had seen almost every true sage. There were countless memories related to the true saint. Now that he thought about it, countless roars echoed in the depths of his memory. Countless indescribable imprints lingered in his mind. Vaguely, he felt as if he had fallen into a boundless and terrifying fluctuation. His entire mind was like a leaf in a storm, drifting chaotically in the midst of the fluctuation. In the face of these countless memories, an inexplicable hesitation appeared in the Realm King's heart. What the Luo Emperor is referring to must be the memories of true sages. Moreover, he is targeting everyone, not just me. In other words, it is not that there is a problem with all the memories related to true sages, but one of them appeared during the first tribulation of heaven and earth. The memories of true sages that are related to all the supreme emperors who have experienced the first tribulation of heaven and earth. As he thought of this, countless memories related to true sages were once again suppressed in the depths of his mind. In the end, all that was left was the sound of the two swords reverberating in his mind. Just as these two memories emerged in the depths of his mind, an indescribable feeling of danger came from one of the loud roars. This is the sound of the conversation between the two true sages. At this moment, the World King had already made a judgment in his heart, and his expression became extremely ugly because of this. In this situation, although he did not know what the two booms were talking about, based on his spiritual senses, there was definitely something wrong with one of the booms. At this moment, the roar began to generate all kinds of indescribable waves. Strands of characters, runes, and images began to flow out from the roar that brought him a sense of danger. At this moment, the memory-severing technique that Luo Fan had mentioned before suddenly came alive. It abruptly transformed into a sharp blade of wisdom and brazenly slashed at the words, runes, and images that were leaking out. In an instant, all of them were completely destroyed. At this instant, the rumbling sounds became even more intense and terrifying. Faintly, the rumbling in the World King's heart began to condense and change. It gradually turned into stone, but it was a faintly discernible body. This body had 3 arms. On each palm, there were 6 fingers. However, its face and the specific appearance of its body were completely blurred and could not be seen at all. After this body was formed, it opened its mouth and spat out countless words. These words, compared to the words, runes, and images that were leaking out from the previous roars, were countless times more numerous and much faster. In just a blink of an eye, it had already filled his entire memory. It made his mind feel an indescribable danger, but he could not help but immerse himself in it. He could not help but immerse himself in those words, immersing himself in the inexplicable principles that were described within. It was an indescribable familiarity. At this moment, it gradually emerged in the World King's heart. The aura of those Taoist friends seemed to be similar to the aura of this cultivation technique. Such a thought instantly appeared in the World King's heart. With this thought, the World King's entire body trembled. Even the innate, inextinguishable spiritual light couldn't stop them from disappearing, but at this time, it actually appeared on his body. In the process of him trying his best to stop himself from immersing himself in the cultivation technique, the memory-severing technique that Luo Fan had mentioned before evolved into thousands of sharp blades of wisdom, slashing into the cultivation technique and the indescribable figure formed by the rumbling. They continuously eliminated the cultivation technique and continuously created wounds on the figure's body. Such a change gave the World King a chance to catch his breath, allowing him to focus his mind and quickly pour it into the memory-severing technique. The power of the memory-severing technique began to rapidly increase, allowing the strength of the wisdom blades to rapidly increase. In this way, the speed of the memory-severing technique became faster and faster. In the end, it finally suppressed the speed created by the rumbling, causing the scale of the cultivation technique to become smaller and smaller. In the end, after an unknown amount of time, all the cultivation techniques finally disappeared. And at this time, all the wisdom blades completely slashed into the figure formed by the rumbling, finally causing the wounds that appeared on the figure to become bigger and denser. Finally, at a certain moment, all the wisdom blades completely slashed into the figure and forcibly detonated. An earth-shattering, thunderous sound came from the World King's body at this moment. In the deepest part of the underworld, the space-time created by the Gui show trembled violently at this moment. In the end, the space-time completely collapsed and everything turned into nothingness. However, it couldn't withstand the terrifying thunderous sound that came from the World King's body. This change alarmed the many Supreme Emperors here, causing them to be bewildered. They didn't know what exactly happened to the World King's body. Faintly, their gazes towards Luo Fan seemed to be filled with doubt. It was somewhat inexplicable. After that thunderous sound, the World King suddenly felt as if he had been freed from his shackles. His entire body floated there. An indescribable sense of ease and freedom lingered around his body, and his expression revealed an indescribable joy. At this moment, in his body, in his heart, the countless blades of wisdom had completely disappeared. Along with them, the rumbling that had transformed into a strange figure from before also disappeared. At the same time, although the World King had already remembered the memory-severing method, he no longer felt anything. He felt that it had become a more complicated memory-severing method. Originally, it was something that could be seen from time to time. The feeling that led him to explore had completely disappeared. At this moment, the World King opened his eyes and bowed to Luo Fan. "Thank you for saving my life. If it weren't for you, the result would have been unpredictable when this hidden danger erupted." At this moment, the World King opened his eyes and bowed to Luo Fan. Hearing this, Luo Fan only smiled faintly and said, "This is because of your own comprehension." Hearing their conversation, the Supreme Emperors were even more bewildered. All the Supreme Emperors were even more surprised and bewildered. There was clearly something they didn't know was hidden in there. However, they couldn't figure out what it was. For a moment, everyone's expression was filled with curiosity, and there was even a faint sense of inexplicable annoyance. "Don't keep us guessing. What exactly is the hidden danger? Can't you just tell us directly?" A level 3 sovereign said to the World King. His face was rough, and his expression was filled with anxiety and annoyance. The World King shook his head and said, "I want to say it, but I can't. Once I say it, things will be irreversible. You can only rely on yourselves to comprehend it." At this moment, he clearly understood why Luo Fan didn't explain this clearly before, and instead used such a confusing method to explain the memory-severing technique. There was no other reason, because if he were to say it out loud, it would instantly ignite the words of the sage that existed in everyone's heart at this moment. At that time, all living beings who heard the sage's words would have the cultivation method to guide living beings into the universe of negative emotions. There was no time for them to activate the method to erase their memories. That cultivation method would allow them to step onto the right path of cultivation. At that time, all the hidden dangers would erupt, and in the end, most of the living beings in this world would disappear without a trace. How could Luo Fan say it directly when there was such a huge danger? So that's how it is. Many of the supreme sovereigns were in disbelief. They didn't doubt the World King's words. After all, if the World King could comprehend it himself, they would be able to comprehend it after some hard work. Once someone comprehended it, and the result was different from what the World King said, the World King wouldn't be able to continue living. Then what should we do? You can at least tell us, right? The Level 3 Sovereign said, "Fellow Taoists, all you need to do is to comprehend the memory-severing technique. When the time is right, you will be able to comprehend it and understand it." The World King said. Hearing this, many of the supreme sovereigns fell into deep thought. At this moment, 3 claps of thunder suddenly reverberated in this void. Because there was no longer the barrier of time and space, the claps of thunder directly spread out. In the blink of an eye, they spread throughout the entire underworld, causing all the time and space in the underworld to reverberate with this clap of thunder. At this moment, many of the supreme sovereigns here had already identified what this clap of thunder was. It was the sound of some kind of shackle being broken. This clap of thunder spread throughout the underworld and instantly caused many living beings in the underworld to emit faint claps of thunder as well. It was as if they had broken some kind of indescribable shackle on their bodies. Many of the supreme sovereigns looked towards the source of the 3 claps of thunder. They discovered that it was the 3 supreme sovereigns beside Luo Fan. They were Gue Shou, Qing Yi, and Yu Ji. At this moment, the 3 of them were surrounded by a kind of relaxed feeling similar to the World Emperor's, a feeling of detachment from everything. It was obvious that they were just like the World King from before, using the technique of erasing memories. He had destroyed the words that he had heard from the true sage in his heart. "Thank you, Master, for your guidance." The 3 of them were extremely happy as they bowed to Luo Fan. Luo Fan only nodded lightly. At this moment, the void shook. A small octagonal door grew from small to large. It formed right in front of him. This octagonal door was blurry and emitted an aura of the connate, inextinguishable spiritual light. It seemed to be attracting and repelling everything at the same time. This is the door that leads to the outside world? Many of the supreme sovereign's expressions changed slightly. "Master, let's leave with you." At this moment, Qing Yi and Yu Ji said impulsively. Hearing this, Luo Fan only shook his head and said, "This passage was created by me using the power of the connate, inextinguishable spiritual light. I used the power of the connate, inextinguishable spiritual light to open it. Only we can pass through. Once you enter, you will be completely crushed by that power and absorbed to maintain the passage. Therefore, you can't leave this world with me." Hearing this, Qing Yi and Yu Ji's expressions changed. There was an indescribable sadness in their eyes. At this moment, the other supreme sovereigns also had an indescribable look of pity on their faces. Their expressions were filled with indescribable helplessness. It was obvious that they had the same thoughts as Qing Yi and Yu Ji. Originally, they wanted to follow Luo Fan through the door and leave this world. Of course, Qing Yi and Yu Ji couldn't bear to leave Luo Fan. They wanted to follow Luo Fan. Therefore, they wanted to leave with him. However, this wasn't the case for them. They were all afraid of the calamity that would happen in 900 million years. They wanted to escape this world and enter a world that they had never been to before. "Fellow Taoists, please." Luo Fan smiled faintly at the supreme sovereigns. As he spoke, he lifted his foot and stepped into the octagonal passage. At this moment, Qing Yi, Yu Ji, and Gue Shou's eyes were filled with tears. In this part of the world, they were very worried when they suddenly couldn't contact Luo Fan at all last time. They had even given up on their own cultivation and tried to awaken him, even if it meant infuriating Luo Fan. They had managed to contact him. Now that Luo Fan had completely left this world and vanished from their senses, they might never be able to see him again. From then on, they would never be able to meet again. It was self-evident what kind of impact this was to them. Tears were obviously a matter of course, seeing the three of them cry. The Supreme Sovereigns were both envious and jealous of Luo Fan. At the same time, they started to get curious. What exactly did it feel like to cry? After Luo Fan stepped into the passage, it slowly shrank and finally closed completely, disappearing without a trace. Following this change, Gui Shou and the other two finally lost all sense of Luo Fan. Their souls seemed to have lost all support at this moment. A feeling of emptiness and fluttering made their eyes fill with confusion. Their tears flowed even more fiercely. At this moment, the expression of one of the Supreme Sovereigns changed dramatically. An inexplicable aura was faintly emitting from his body. This aura carried traces of the aura of the universe of negative emotions. It was as if there was an inexplicable attraction force that was pulling him into the universe of negative emotions. Oh no! The Realm Sovereign knew at a glance that he had somehow triggered the rumble of the sage's words and caused the cultivation method that led living beings into the universe of negative emotions to appear. Following this change, the surrounding Supreme Sovereigns were all horrified. One by one, they distanced themselves from the Supreme Sovereign and watched the changes that were taking place on the body of the Supreme Sovereign with fearful and horrified expressions. At this moment, an invisible sharp blade suddenly appeared above the Supreme Sovereign's head and slashed into the void around his body, instantly extinguishing the aura. Following this, more and more sharp blades appeared and slashed into the void, continuously extinguishing the inexplicable aura that was constantly emerging, causing it to naturally disappear as soon as it appeared. At this moment, the expression of the Supreme Sovereign gradually calmed down from his initial panic. Although he was still a little solemn, at least he was no longer panicking. In a short while, all the sharp blades disappeared completely, and the body of the Supreme Sovereign no longer emitted that inexplicable aura. After an unknown period of time, a thunderous sound came from the body of the Supreme Sovereign. This sound also spread throughout the entire underworld. Moreover, compared to the thunderous sound that had been produced by the bodies of Gui Shou and the others, this thunderous sound was even louder. The feeling of breaking through the shackles was even more intense. After this, the Supreme Sovereign felt an indescribable sense of relief. When he opened his eyes, his gaze was filled with joy and gratitude for Mo Min, fellow Taoist. What happened just now? Another Supreme Sovereign hurriedly asked when he saw what happened. The Supreme Sovereign thought about it and sighed. I can't say. However, I still advise everyone to properly comprehend the memory-destroying technique. After saying that, he cupped his hands at the Realm Sovereign. He took a step forward and disappeared into the void. He directly entered the space-time of the fake sacred civilization and returned to his own cultivation ground. Hearing what he said was similar to what the Realm Sovereign had said, and seeing him leave so decisively, the various Supreme Sovereigns fell into deep thought as they recalled the various changes that had occurred to him. Some of the quick-thinking ones had even vaguely figured out the source of this. Perhaps what fellow Taoist Luo Huang left behind is really an item that has saved our lives. That was the thought in his mind. This thought gradually surfaced in everyone's minds. At this moment, Gui Shou and the other two had also gradually come back to their senses. Their eyes were a little lonely as they turned around and left. However, they didn't even bid farewell to the others. Qing Yi and Yu Ji naturally returned to the place where their innate, inextinguishable spirit light was located. After so many years of development, the two of them had now gained initial control of the innate, inextinguishable spirit light. Although it wasn't to the level of control that other level 3 sovereigns had over the innate, inextinguishable spirit light, they could already use it to protect themselves. In other words, within the range of the innate, inextinguishable spirit light, even a level 3 sovereign would definitely not be able to defeat them and seize the innate, inextinguishable spirit light. It was precisely because of this that they weren't worried that the location of the innate, inextinguishable spirit light would be leaked to other supreme sovereigns. As for Gui's show, he directly returned to the shroud of the Book of Life and Death and the Judge's brush. He once again formed an indescribable fusion with the two pseudo-primordial origin spiritual treasures. This fusion was also similar to the fusion with the innate inextinguishable spirit light. Moreover, because they were the two pseudo-primordial origin spiritual treasures that were born in this world, they were born with an extremely deep degree of fusion with him. Therefore, his ability to control these two pseudo-primordial origin spiritual treasures was many times stronger than the innate inextinguishable spiritual light that level 3 martial emperors could control. The power that he could display was only second to the world emperor. In this way, his ability to protect himself was obviously enough. Therefore, at this moment, when the many supreme sovereigns saw the three of them leaving, none of them said anything. Even the living beings who originally had a strong desire to seize the resources that the three of them controlled did not have any thoughts of challenging them at this moment. After the three of them left, the world emperor didn't stay there either. He only emphasized that everyone should properly comprehend the method of erasing memories. Then, he turned around and left the nothingness in the depths of the underworld. He returned to the supreme palace in the fake holy civilization to comprehend the rewards he had obtained after eliminating the hidden danger. Perhaps I should also talk a few more times to pass down this memory-severing technique. Occasionally, such a thought flashed through the world emperor's mind. Although the memory-severing technique was complicated, as long as one knew the principle and the goal, the world emperor will be able to study it if he put in the effort. Therefore, if he wanted to talk about the memory-severing technique to achieve the same effect as what Luo Fan had said before, it wouldn't be difficult. With this thought in mind, he had already made his decision. However, this was a matter for the future. After all, if the living beings that were too weak knew about the memory-severing technique, it would be difficult for them to have enough strength to destroy the true divine's words. On the contrary, if the living beings that were too weak knew about this, they would only activate the words in advance, causing the hidden danger to erupt in advance. As the world emperor left, the other supreme sovereigns also left the nothingness one by one and gradually returned to their cave residences. In the next tens of millions of years, there would be thunderous sounds that contained the charm of breaking the shackles from time to time, echoing endlessly between heaven and earth. Chapter 1759. Everything that was happening in that world was meaningless to Luo Fan. While all sorts of changes were taking place in that world, he had already left the perfect world through the octagonal passageway and headed towards Earth's universe. Even if the two perfect worlds were tightly connected, it would still be extremely difficult to cross them. Crossing the distance between them was like crossing an endless road. In that passageway, time was utterly meaningless. In Luo Fan's perception, he'd been flying in that incomparably strange and extremely long spatial passageway for an unknown number of millions of years before he finally felt the space before him turn empty. He'd broken through that invisible barrier and entered a perfect world that was completely different from the one he was in before. Is this the feeling of a perfect world that has undergone the seventh great tribulation? This thought flashed across Luo Fan's mind as he sensed the feeling that the world before him gave him. The octagonal passageway existed in an extremely mysterious state. Although it was supported by the Light Emperor and the other 7 Supreme Emperors, it still relied on the power of the connate inextinguishable spiritual light. Under such circumstances, the space-time passageway would naturally close up wherever he passed by. Therefore, the moment he left the passageway, the space-time passageway had already closed up around him, as if it had never existed. The Light Emperor and the other 7 Supreme Emperors had also completely returned to the connate inextinguishable spiritual light, as if they had never appeared in the first place. Luo Fan looked back and found that there was nothing behind him. There was nothing at all. Even the puppets of time and space did not exist. Around them, in the boundless nothingness, there was an endless void. It was filled with an indescribable aura. This kind of aura was so obscure, so illusory. If it wasn't for the fact that he was a third-grade emperor, he wouldn't have been able to sense it. If he hadn't been a third-grade emperor, he would have passed through a completely different world. He definitely wouldn't have sensed the existence of this aura. It was faintly discernible. Luo Fan could sense the traces left behind by the Great Tribulation in the extremely obscure aura. The layers of marks looked like rings upon rings of a tree. Through the number of marks, one could easily tell how many great tribulations this world had gone through. It's just as I guessed. This world is about to undergo the 8th Great Tribulation of heaven and earth. This world should have completely shattered after the 8th Great Tribulation of the world. In the end, it will enter a cycle of eras. He thought to himself with a grave expression. This situation was the future of this world. In the past, he had taken it for granted. However, from his point of view, it didn't make sense no matter how he looked at it. Would the existence of a true divine really allow things to develop according to his own understanding? Various thoughts flashed through his mind. In the end, he shook his head and shook all of these thoughts out of his mind. He thought to himself, these things are still too far away from me. All I can do now is cultivate as much as I can. I will try my best to perfect my worldview. If I can make a breakthrough in these 3 billion years and become a true divine, then I won't have to be afraid of anything. With this thought in his mind, he lifted his foot and took a step forward. His figure had already crossed the void and entered the gap between heaven and earth and the state of chaos. He entered the world that he had opened up there, the world that he originally wanted to rely on to exist freely in the state of chaos. In an instant, it fused with his body. At this moment, the innate, inextinguishable spiritual light behind his head. It hung directly behind the head of his body. He had entered that perfect world for hundreds of millions of years, but because the space-time of the 2 perfect worlds was not synchronized. In fact, only tens of millions of years had passed in this universe. Due to the adjustments made by his main body, only a little more than 1,000 years had passed in this part of the space-time. Now, there was still a long time before the next great tribulation of heaven and earth. The relationship between the main body and the doppelganger was many times closer than the relationship between the main body and the doppelganger. There was no loss in the communication between the two, and there were no obstacles at all. The moment his main body and the doppelganger completely fused, all the gains of the doppelganger had completely become the main body's. His entire body began to emit the aura of the world of laws. This aura was even denser and more essential than the world he was in. After it appeared, it naturally affected the surrounding space-time, causing the surrounding space-time to show signs of the law transformation. Moreover, because this world was completely created by him according to the world of laws, the spread of the law transformation was many times faster than the other worlds, and the scale was also many times larger. In the blink of an eye, it had already swept across the entire world, causing the entire world to become extremely deep and profound. The various structures, combinations, and mysteries that were originally only compatible with the world he had entered, which was the false saint-level world of laws, began to gradually change at this time, becoming a new, deeper, more perfect and pure world of laws. It only took a moment for his main body and the doppelganger to fuse and communicate. However, for his world of laws to truly go deep into the entire world and completely change the essence of the entire world, it would take billions of times longer than the fusion between his main body and the doppelganger. When this change appeared, the air maiden, who was cultivating in this world, was the first to feel it. She immediately stopped her cultivation in shock. With a shift in the void, she went deep into the layers of laws and arrived at the place where Luo Fan had opened up his cave abode. She saw Luo Fan, who was floating in the grayish existence, and also saw the connate, inextinguishable spiritual light in the form of a halo behind his head. Luo Fan, what's wrong? The air maiden looked at Luo Fan. There was an inexplicable worry in her eyes as she muttered. After all these years of cultivation, the air maiden's world of laws had now been perfected to the false saint level. Although his current cultivation level was only at the pseudo-sage level, He was comparable to any supreme emperor in the other world. She was even closer to a true saint. However, this level was still not enough for her to enter the grayish existence at this moment. Just like in the past, she had to rely on Luo Fan's guidance to enter. Now that Luo Fan had fallen into a state that was close to a deep sleep, he was completely unaware of the changes in the outside world. Naturally, she had no way of entering the grayish existence to meet Luo Fan. At this moment, the connate inextinguishable spiritual light behind Luo Fan's head was fluctuating slightly. The halo suddenly turned into a ball, then into various creatures, and then into various landscapes and terrains. Some of them were extremely familiar to the Air Maiden, while some were extremely unfamiliar to him. The Space Maiden was extremely curious about what it was when she saw all of this. The speed of the change was getting faster, and the extent of the change was getting larger and larger. In the end, it even connected into one. It turned into a light and shadow, constantly twisting behind his head. Just when the Air Maiden thought that the change would last forever, the connate inextinguishable spiritual light suddenly condensed into a sharp blade. It violently slashed into Luo Fan's body. The Air Maiden couldn't help but scream at the sudden change. Although she hadn't seen clearly what the connate inextinguishable spiritual light was these days. However, she could sense the incomparably terrifying aura that was being transmitted from it. In his heart, he clearly knew that even if there were millions or billions of him, he would still be easily crushed and destroyed in the face of that constantly changing thing. Under such circumstances, it was so powerful. For such a terrifying thing to suddenly slash into Luo Fan's body, it was a terrible change in her eyes. One could imagine, how could she remain indifferent in the face of such a change? In the midst of the scream, the dusky existence couldn't withstand the shock of the thunderous sound, and it completely collapsed. It was as if it had never appeared. This thunderclap was like a switch, triggering more and more thunderclaps, which were getting more and more intense. These sounds were no longer obstructed by the grayish existence. Instead, they continued to pass through layers and layers of laws and into the normal space-time. They continued to spread to a wider and wider area, allowing the living beings in the space-time to feel the power to break through their shackles and break free from the shackles imposed on them by the world or other existences. All sorts of principles that they couldn't comprehend due to certain restrictions kept appearing in their minds. The cultivation civilization of this world. Because of this change, they actually made great progress and started to improve. This thunderous sound seemed to be endless. It was constantly transmitted from Luo Fan's body and spread throughout the world. In the end, there was an unprecedented thunderous sound. The flow of time in the world actually started to accelerate. Only a few days had passed in the outside world, but tens of millions of years had passed here. The great tribulation that Luo Fan had suppressed for a long time suddenly began to descend. However, this great tribulation of the world was far inferior to the great tribulation of the world experienced by the other side of the perfect world. Luo Fan did not even need to make a move. Just by relying on the thunderous sounds that continued to come from Luo Fan's body, this was already enough to destroy the great tribulation, causing most of the world to be destroyed. Bathed in the white light of passing the great tribulation, it began to grow rapidly. Rapidly grow. After that, although the flow of time slowed down a lot compared to before, it was still extremely fast. Only a short 10,000 years had passed in the outside world, but the world had already passed for billions of years. During these billions of years, the world had passed through several great tribulations in succession. Although the strength of the great tribulation of the heavens and earth increased with each passing great tribulation. However, because the thunderous sounds kept ringing out, it constantly helped the cultivation civilization of the world to improve and help the world pass through the great tribulation. Therefore, every time there was a great tribulation of the heavens and earth would pass through it without any mishaps. When the thunderous sounds completely disappeared and Luo Fan gradually woke up in the deepest part of the layers of laws, the world was about to pass through the eighth Great Tribulation. This, compared to Luo Fan's initial speculation, was already several times stronger. It's finally done. I didn't expect that it would take such a long time to completely destroy all the comprehensions related to true divinity in my body. Luo Fan's heart flashed with such a thought, and he slowly opened his eyes. At a glance, the layers of laws of the world had already become 8 layers, just as he had planned. The entire world was filled with a faintly discernible and extremely obscure aura that contained traces of the 7 great tribulations of the world. Just from these 2 situations, one could already see how many great tribulations this world had passed when he had used the connate, inextinguishable spiritual light to form a sharp blade of wisdom to destroy his original body's comprehension of true holiness. I didn't expect that I would unknowingly raise my limit to this level. Sensing the world in front of him, he had an inexplicable feeling on his face. With a thought, he opened his hand slightly, and a ball of light slowly flowed out from his palm, gradually condensing. This was his connate, inextinguishable spiritual light. After the connate, inextinguishable spiritual light appeared, he stepped into it and directly arrived in the void between the endless worlds within the connate, inextinguishable spiritual light. Compared to before, the connate, inextinguishable spiritual light had not changed at all. It was as if all the indescribable changes that had happened before had never happened. After arriving here, the copper mirror that had evolved from a part of the connate, inextinguishable spiritual light shook slightly. It had already appeared in front of him and started to happily spin around him. It has spiritual intelligence. Luo Fan's heart skipped a beat. The primordial spiritual treasure itself had spiritual intelligence. This was a matter of course. But this kind of spiritual intelligence was completely different from the will of a living being. It was more similar to the will of heaven and earth. Its thinking circuit and way of thinking were completely incomprehensible to living beings. Normally, if a cultivator who was not a true sage wanted to control it, they could only control it in the same way as a magic treasure without spiritual intelligence. This was the method that Luo Fan had always used to control the copper mirror. But now, the copper mirror was obviously completely different from before. This kind of spiritual behavior clearly showed that its spiritual intelligence had already transformed into the spiritual intelligence of a living being. This, on a certain level, it was a kind of regression. However, for Luo Fan, it was a happy thing. He pointed his finger, and the copper mirror in front of him shook slightly. It melted in midair and transformed into the figure of a 3-year-old boy in the blink of an eye. It started to climb up and down on Luo Fan's body happily. When Luo Fan saw this, he suddenly felt that he had done something unnecessary. He had originally thought that the spiritual intelligence of this copper mirror would at least be at the level of a teenager. He did not expect it to be at the level of a 3-year-old. However, since he had already done it, he could not be bothered to change it. He sighed, and with a thought, he instantly found the sky maiden who was cultivating in a certain world in the connate, inextinguishable spiritual light. With a thought, he lifted his foot and took a light step forward. In a blink of an eye, his figure had already traversed an endless distance, crossed layers of time and space, and appeared directly in front of the Sky Maiden. The Sky Maiden was refining a magic treasure in the 9 heavens just now. When Luo Fan suddenly appeared here, her body trembled. There was an indescribable surprise in her eyes. "You're here." After all, she had an extremely calm personality. In the end, she only uttered this sentence calmly. "Yes, I'm here. It's been hard on you all these years." Luo Fan sighed and said with some shame. The Sky Maiden shook her head and said, "It's not hard on me. I'm just a little worried about you." Luo Fan sighed, opened his hand, and gently held the air maiden in his arms. This was not the first time he hugged the Sky Maiden, but it was the warmest time he had ever felt. Being hugged by Luo Fan, an extremely satisfied smile appeared on the Sky Maiden's face. She gently hugged Luo Fan back. It was his own will to keep the sky maiden in the connate, inextinguishable spiritual light. At that time, as his clone and his main body had fused, he felt that his main body was slightly incompatible. It was as if he was carrying an extremely heavy burden that was constantly eroding his view of the world. Therefore, he did not have time to do anything else. He controlled the connate, inextinguishable spiritual light and turned it into a wisdom blade that began to slash the various comprehensions of his main body regarding the existence of the true divine realm. At that time, he did not feel anything at all about the changes in the outside world. It was only when the sky maiden screamed and crashed into the gray existence that he sensed something. He sensed that the sky maiden was in danger. At that time, he diverted his attention to control the connate, inextinguishable spiritual light to stop the process of slashing his comprehensions. It left his body and slashed the sky maiden's location, keeping her in the connate, inextinguishable spiritual light. After entering the connate, inextinguishable spiritual light, the sky maiden was a little panicked and worried at first. However, she soon sensed the traces that Luo Fan had left here and gradually understood that this strange thing was not harming Luo Fan. Instead, it was very likely that Luo Fan was controlling it to carry out some kind of cultivation that she could not understand. After understanding this, she was slightly relieved. In the long years, she began to walk and cultivate in the various worlds within the connate, inextinguishable spiritual light. Suddenly, the Sky Maiden noticed the 3-year-old child lying behind Luo Fan. She was slightly shocked and asked, "What's this?" Chapter 1760. Hearing this, the child behind Luo Fan had a bright smile on his face. He threw himself at the air hostess with open arms and said, "Coo." His cuteness was off the charts, causing the air hostess's doubts to disappear in the blink of an eye. She suddenly hugged the child and said, "How cute." Seeing this, Luo Fan could not help but feel helpless. He did not expect that the air hostess, who had reached this level, could not escape the temptation of such a cute thing. However, this also saved him from having to explain more, so he was happy to see it happen. After a while, the air hostess asked, "Did you leave this world previously? Why do I feel that you have changed so much this time?" Hearing this, Luo Fan nodded and said, "That's right. I did leave this world as a clone. In other words, I left the Earth universe and entered another world of the same level as the Earth universe." Left the Earth universe. The air hostess could not help but be curious. After being Luo Fan's cultivation companion for such a long time, she had even learned the importance of the worldview from Luo Fan, let alone Luo Fan's name for this world. Therefore, at this moment, she was quite clear about what the Earth universe Luo Fan meant. That's right. Luo Fan did not hesitate. With a thought, he instantly transmitted everything he had experienced in this world to the air hostess's mind through the spiritual connection. Of course, he naturally could not transmit the various comprehensions that he had comprehended to the air hostess at this moment. The comprehension of extermination wasn't just for show. Although the process of comprehension from back then still existed, all the principles and mysteries that he had comprehended had been completely forgotten. As for the power that he had grasped now, it was similar to the power that he had obtained after comprehending those mysteries and principles. It was completely deduced from his worldview, although the power did not weaken. However, the foundation was completely different from before. This kind of existence was meaningless to the air hostess, who had already established her own worldview, the experience of hundreds of millions of years. Even for the air hostess, it was an extremely huge amount of information. Her mind received such a message. The air hostess's eyes instantly became blank. There were countless electric lights flashing in her mind. Countless thoughts were constantly being absorbed by her in this process. This kind of absorption was like experiencing everything that was described in the information. It was many times more powerful than the absorption of information by ordinary people. Under such circumstances, the process would naturally take a long time. After a whole year, the woman finally recovered from her daze, and a look of shock appeared on her face. "I see. There's actually such a high-grade world. I'm truly a frog at the bottom of a well." After turning around, the space maiden sighed and said. Hearing this, Luo Fan smiled and said, I used to pursue the level of the world, but now I understand that the level of the world is very important to other cultivators. But to cultivators like us who understand the importance of a unique worldview, it is not essential. Of the worldview. World, as long as it's perfect enough, it's more than enough for us. Tian is good enough. Tian is Chun. Hearing this, the air hostess nodded and her eyes became clear. Then, she suddenly said, Why didn't you bring Qing, Yi, and Yu Ji here? Didn't I say that the passage only supported me and not them? Luo Fan said helplessly. He naturally knew what the air hostess meant. It was obvious that she had a problem with him treating the two of them so well. However, he didn't care much about this. After all, the air hostess had always been too calm and indifferent. She had even reached the point of indifference. Although she was much better than before, she still didn't seem to care about anything. Under such circumstances, her sudden emotional fluctuation made Luo Fan feel even more warm. Since you can keep me in the connate, inextinguishable spiritual aura, it shouldn't be a problem to keep them in here, right? The air hostess said calmly. How can it not be a problem? Although they can be kept in here, their connate, inextinguishable spiritual aura can't. In order to keep them in here, they have to give up on the connate, inextinguishable spiritual aura. Needless to say, the loss outweighs the gain. Luo Fan only smiled. The air hostess thought for a while and finally nodded. Indeed. Seeing this, Luo Fan quickly changed the topic and began to talk about the connate, inextinguishable spiritual aura. He told the air hostess about the classification of the level 9 world. After hearing this, the air hostess quickly broke away from her previous unhappiness and began to listen to Luo Fan's narration carefully. She already knew Luo Fan's intention when she first understood what this place was. She knew that from then on, this place should be her permanent place of cultivation. She would only be able to leave the connate, inextinguishable spiritual aura when she truly broke through and became a true sage. Under such circumstances, it would naturally be better for her to have a deeper understanding of this place, and the faster her cultivation speed would be. After Luo Fan's narration attracted the air hostess's attention, he heaved a sigh of relief. Just as the air hostess had thought, he had indeed planned to completely place the air hostess in the connate, inextinguishable spiritual aura. The connate, inextinguishable spiritual aura was an existence that could exist for a long time in the state of chaos. Such an existence was even safer than the perfect world. After all, the perfect world still had a great calamity of the world. Once it couldn't be overcome, the world would be completely destroyed. In this way, it was obvious that even if it was a perfect world, there was still a possibility of death for living beings in it. However, the connate, inextinguishable spiritual aura was different. Even if the perfect world was destroyed, the connate, inextinguishable spiritual aura would not be damaged. Even if it sank into the state of chaos, all living beings in it could still exist forever. Apart from this, there were so many worlds in the connate, inextinguishable spiritual aura, and the laws of the worlds were complicated and profound. They had all reached the limits of one's imagination. However, it was enough for the air hostess to perfect her view of the world. Wasn't such a safe and suitable place for cultivation the best place for the air hostess? As for the world that he had created with the help of the Supreme Venerable's treasure from the state of chaos, that imperfect perfect world was now dispensable to him. He had originally planned to let it go through the 9 great calamities. From there, he would raise its level to the level of the great world. In the end, he would be free of calamities and obtain endless time to cultivate and pursue becoming a saint. However, its function had now been replaced by the connate, inextinguishable spiritual aura. Moreover, after experiencing the horror of the great calamity of the world, he knew that the possibility of this world surviving the 9 great calamities was extremely slim. It could almost be said to be impossible. In this case, he naturally couldn't value this world as much as before. The most suitable place for you to cultivate now should be the level 1 world. However, this world isn't a level 1 world, but a level 3 world. For the time being, it's not suitable for you to cultivate here, Luo Fan finally said to the air hostess after a brief explanation. Hearing this, the air hostess nodded and said, I see. No wonder I've always felt that the principles of this world are too profound. It's a little unbearable to my view of the world. Luo Fan smiled. Pulling the air hostess along, he teleported and arrived in a level 1 world among the many worlds. After arriving here, he didn't leave. Instead, he walked in this world with the air hostess for tens of thousands of years, continuously guiding the air hostess in her cultivation. Through his own cultivation process, he reversed some of the detours that she had taken and guided her to the most correct and direct path. Because of his help, the air hostess had actually broken through many realms in just 10,000 years and reached the false saint level. Moreover, due to the uniqueness of the connate, inextinguishable spiritual aura, this false saint didn't need to integrate with any world at all. It was almost like she had stepped onto the path that Luo Fan had taken in the past. What matched this realm was her view of the world. It had also been perfected to the false saint level. Although she was extremely far away from Luo Fan, given her current state, even ordinary desperados wouldn't dare to say that they would definitely win against her. On this day, the air hostess completed her cultivation and said in satisfaction, I didn't expect that I would break through to this level in such a short time. Hearing this, Luo Fan smiled and said, It's very easy to break through to this level. However, it won't be so easy to continue breaking through. Your current view of the world is compatible with your cultivation. There are 2 things you need to cultivate next. First, work hard to perfect your view of the world. Second, try your best to integrate your view of the world with everything you have. Only when your view of the world is integrated with everything you have can it be considered a view that truly belongs to you. Only then can you truly embark on the correct path to become a true saint. Hearing this, the air hostess smiled blissfully and nodded. To the air hostess, these 10,000 years of cultivation could be said to be the happiest time of her life. In fact, it was even happier than the time she spent with Luo Fan back then. This was because during these 10,000 years, she could feel Luo Fan's unreserved trust in her. She also felt that she was following Luo Fan towards the true ultimate goal. This feeling of moving forward hand in hand was what she was most looking forward to. The air hostess felt extremely happy and blissful. Luo Fan also felt extremely relaxed. Throughout the 10,000 years of guiding the air hostess in her cultivation, he also felt an indescribable warmth lingering in his heart. Even his soul was inexplicably sublimated because of this warmth, and there were all sorts of indescribable happiness emerging from the bottom of his heart out of nowhere. Apart from this feeling of his soul, his cultivation was not dragged down at all. On the contrary, in the process of guiding the air hostess in her cultivation, he vaguely felt that his understanding of the world had become deeper. His understanding of his future path had also become clearer. After a slight sigh, Luo Fan said to the air hostess, All right, I've told you all that I can guide you. Now, you can cultivate on your own. Hearing this, the air hostess's eyes were filled with reluctance, but she still knew that this was bound to happen. After all, although they were cultivation companions, they also had their own cultivation. It was impossible for them to be together for a long time. Therefore, she nodded and said, Be careful. Luo Fan smiled and said, Don't worry. With that, he hugged the air hostess. As he spoke, he hugged the air hostess. He turned around and took a step forward. His figure was already out of the natural, inextinguishable spiritual light. After returning to the outside of the natural, inextinguishable spiritual light, he casually grabbed it, and the natural, inextinguishable spiritual light integrated into his body. It seemed as if it did not exist at all. In the Earth's universe, he was not invincible. He naturally could not do something as arrogant as hanging the natural, inextinguishable spiritual light behind his head anymore. After putting away the natural, inextinguishable spiritual light, he had a thought. The situation of this world had already been completely imprinted in his heart. This part of the world had already passed through 7 great tribulations. Now, the time dimension had unknowingly become the same as the time dimension of the Earth's universe. Moreover, it seemed that because both of them had gone through the same number of tribulations, his world had now been expelled out of the Earth's universe. Of course, although it had been expelled out of the Earth's universe, it did not mean that it was completely separated from the Earth's universe. In fact, the current world was like the world that he had stayed in for hundreds of millions of years. It had become a perfect world that was completely connected to the Earth's universe. After going through so many major tribulations, this world itself had become a perfect world that was completely connected to the Earth's universe. It had become completely different from before. Now, the entire world was tens of thousands or even hundreds of thousands of times bigger than before. Compared to the perfect world from before, although it was much weaker, its size was already not much different compared to the Earth's universe and the cultivation civilization in this world. Unknowingly, it had risen to an inconceivable level. Now, the strongest person in this world was no longer a false saint. Instead, it was a supreme emperor. Although it was only a second-level supreme emperor, compared to before, it had already increased by tens of thousands of times. In the entire world, there were 7 supreme emperors. Under this, the number of false saints and desperation added up. There were more than 10,000 of them. Further down was the number of false saints and quasi-saints. There were millions of times more than that. Unknowingly, it has already developed to this level. Luo Fan sighed slightly. The population of the entire world had almost exceeded the limit of numbers. But because of the vastness of the world, there were so many people distributed in this world, but it even seemed to be quite sparsely populated. Among them, there were many cultivators and powerhouses distributed among the people, and they seemed to be extremely sparse. At this moment, where Luo Fan was, he was under the 8th layer of laws of this world, in a position that even the supreme emperors could not reach. Below him, above the 7th layer of laws and regulations, the 7 exalted emperors had opened up 7 cavern abodes. In other words, they were 7 independent spaces. These spacetimes were also developing prosperous civilizations, and there were powerhouses being born from them at every moment. Below this was the 6th layer of rules and laws, which was the level of desperation. There were 360 desperation men who had opened up 360 space-time spaces in this place. Although these space-times were considered independent, each space-time was inextricably linked to the space-time of a certain supreme emperor. It was as if the space-time of the supreme emperor was their space-time of heaven, immortal world, or God world. Above the 5th layer of laws was the space-time opened up by those false saints. There were more than 9,000 of them. Their space-time was also inextricably linked to the space-time of the desperation above. They also treated those space-times as their space-time of heaven, immortal world, and God world. In fact, at this moment, when Luo Fan was watching, he could even see the living beings in it flying to a certain space-time above. On the 4th level, there was no longer such a pattern. There were countless spacetimes or space-time fragments densely packed there. They mixed together in an extremely chaotic manner, forming an indescribable isolation layer that isolated the 4th layer of laws from the 5th layer of laws. This made it even more difficult for the cultivators to reach the 5th layer of laws. In the 3rd layer of laws, the 2nd layer of laws, and the 1st layer of laws, there was no longer any space-time. However, although there was no space-time, there were countless strange living beings living in it. There were all kinds of strange living beings, and Luo Fan had never seen them in any other world. He had never seen them in any space-time. Their essence was between reality and illusion, and they seemed to be real. At the same time, they seemed to be illusory. They did not exist by relying on space-time, but by relying on laws. They wandered between the layers of laws, constantly absorbing the little bit of power produced by the circulation of laws, using it to maintain their lives. During this process, they released all kinds of indescribable power nourishing the layers of laws, allowing the laws within to grow indescribably through this process. Luo Fan analyzed it for a while and discovered there are almost more than 10 million types of living beings. Some of them were weak, and even ordinary people could easily deal with them and control them. As for the powerful ones, even false saints had to be careful when dealing with them. Of course, no matter how strong they could only be at the level of false saints. False saints were among them. They were already absolutely invincible existences. The lower the layer of laws, the weaker the number of living beings. Until the normal layer of space-time, these kinds of living beings had completely disappeared. And the space-time of this world, after being tempered and enhanced by the great tribulation of heaven and earth, had now risen to an unbelievable level. The stability of the space and the stability of time had reached an incomparably shocking level. Furthermore, even innate, grand, heavenly realm cultivators would need to expend an extremely great amount of energy to move space-time. But because the layers of laws of this world were divided according to complexity, this caused the number of cultivators in this world to be higher than any other world. Moreover, perhaps because of the various kinds of living beings in the layer of laws, this world had developed various cultivation systems that were based on these living beings. Countless cultivators used the characteristics of these living beings to let their senses enter the layer of laws. They used the characteristics of these living beings to comprehend the profundities of the laws, thus improving their own life. Apart from that, there was also a cultivation system that relied on these living beings to fight. Just like summoners, they used various methods to sign contracts with these living beings and activated the contracts during battles. They used their own power to give these living beings a physical form in the real world to fight for them and obtain everything they wanted for them. Luo Fan looked at the completely unfamiliar evolution of the world that he had opened up, and an inexplicable interest suddenly arose in his heart. With a move of his body, he instantly crossed the layers of rules and laws and arrived at the normal space-time layer. The place where he appeared was on top of a precipitous peak. The vitality of this peak was so dense that it had even turned into liquid. It made the peak that was millions of meters high in the sky look like it was at the bottom of the sea. In fact, there were even some strange fish that were born in this Yuan Shi, and they were swimming and living in it. When Luo Fan arrived, he made a grabbing motion in the air. Among the surrounding essence Qi, strands of silk were caught in his hand. This is the evolution of laws. He looked at the threads with an inexplicable smile on his face. Although the function of this world that supported him to exist in the state of chaos had disappeared, the evolution function of the world of laws had been strengthened instead. In particular, after losing his control and being tempered time and time again by the great tribulations of the world, the evolution became closer and closer to the essence of the world of laws and vividly displayed the profundities of the world of laws. Based on his understanding of the world of laws, he clearly knew that the threads in front of him were an extremely pure product of evolution after being tempered by the great tribulation of the world of laws several times. Chapter 1761. Looking at the evolving threads, Luo Fan casually shook his hand, and the threads poured into the void. As the layers of laws and laws were connected, all sorts of profound principles and mysteries surged out from the layers of laws and laws with the help of these threads, slowly fusing with this space-time. These principles and mysteries were so mysterious that after they merged with space-time, everything on this mountain began to undergo indescribable changes. Indistinctly, inexplicable worlds began to form here. There were all sorts of strange worlds, but they all followed a set of fundamental principles. That was the fundamental principle of the nomological worldview. Moreover, they didn't follow the complete nomological worldview, but rather a very small part of it. Under normal circumstances, it was simply impossible to stabilize space-time and stabilize the world. These worlds frantically absorbed the surrounding origin energy, causing the endless origin energy to constantly pour into them, causing the worlds to evolve into all kinds of indescribable creatures. These creatures were vaguely similar to the seemingly real and illusory creatures that existed between the layers of laws and laws. They relied entirely on the power released by the circulation of laws and laws to survive. They also had the appearance of chaos as he watched these worlds form. A faint smile appeared on Luo Fan's face. The birth of these worlds didn't contain his will at all. All the evolution processes and the final results were the natural transformation of heaven and earth, the result of the interaction between the threads and the layers of laws and laws. Now that these worlds could reach this level, it was enough to see how mysterious the evolving threads were. With a slight movement in his heart, Luo Fan made a grabbing motion with his hand, and the threads shook once again. It had already been extracted from between the layers of laws and laws. As these threads were extracted, the constantly evolving worlds suddenly stabilized. Although they didn't collapse, they seemed to have completely lost their vitality. At most, they could only maintain their current appearance, and it was impossible for them to evolve further. As for those threads, in Luo Fan's hands, they had undergone a subtle change. It was as if it had been assimilated by the layer of laws and laws, gradually losing its original purity and gradually transforming into laws or laws. Luo Fan sighed when he saw the changes happening to the threads. He shook his body once again and poured the threads into the law layer, just like before. It directly connected to the 8 layers of laws and laws that existed behind every space-time at this moment, and even directly connected to the 8th layer of laws and laws. As these threads connected the law layer, countless higher-level principles and mysteries poured into these worlds through those threads, slowly causing those worlds to undergo all sorts of indescribable changes. These principles and mysteries were mixed together to form the power contained within the layers of rules and laws, yet they displayed characteristics that were different from any other place in this world. As these worlds evolved, they began to transform in a more and more complicated direction. In the end, in just a few days, these worlds had completely turned into a large cluster of extremely strange and complicated worlds. Among them, he was able to find principles and mysteries related to any layer of laws and laws. Some mysteries were extremely simple. Even if ordinary people saw them, they would be able to gain a lot from them. Some principles were extremely complicated, and even supreme emperors would be confused when they saw them. They had no idea what they were. This state of completely breaking boundaries and completely condensing all principles and mysteries was similar to the state of any other space-time, but it was the first time it had appeared in this world. For a time, all sorts of inexplicable fluctuations were naturally released from these worlds and quickly spread across this vast and boundless world. Countless powerful cultivators gradually sensed the existence of these fluctuations during this process. They began to move towards the location of these fluctuations. Although the cultivation civilization in this world was not as prosperous as the perfect world that Luo Fan had stayed in before, except for the fact that there were no true saints, it was slightly inferior to the Earth's universe. Everything else was not inferior to the Earth's universe at all. In such a world, how many powerful cultivators were hidden in it? But it was conceivable. At this moment, with the appearance of this kind of fluctuation that had a boundless attraction to many cultivators, how many cultivators would quickly rush over here? Was there any need to say more? After a few breaths of time, shadows began to appear in the sky one after another, quickly heading towards this mountain peak, or rather, this group of worlds. Seeing all these changes, Luo Fan only smiled faintly. With a thought in his heart, he lifted his foot and took a step forward, leaving the mountain peak. This place was an unexpected result of the power of the threads that he had evolved from the laws of law, but he was also happy to see it happen. This was because this place had broken the limits of this world. It made the originally strict hierarchical structure of this world lose its effect. In this place, living beings no longer needed to reach a certain realm to comprehend a certain layer of laws like before. Instead, they could comprehend all the layers of laws no matter what level they were at. This was obviously a good thing for this world. By dividing the layers of laws and making the simplest ones the easiest for living beings to sense, and the most complicated ones the hardest for living beings to sense. This was a pioneering work that Luo Fan was extremely proud of. The development of reality also proved the effectiveness of his pioneering work, causing the cultivation civilization of this world to become unprecedentedly prosperous. This world, which was originally extremely far away from Earth's universe, had unknowingly caught up to Earth's universe. In fact, it could even be said that Luo Fan's pioneering work had played a huge role in this world surviving so many great tribulations. But this did not mean that his work was perfect, and there were no disadvantages at all. Dividing the layers of laws into layers indeed made it easier for living beings to embark on the path of cultivation. This made it even easier for cultivators to improve. But at the same time, it also limited the development of some heavenly geniuses. The number of living beings in this world had almost surpassed the limits of the numbers. Among them, there were naturally existences who could comprehend the mysteries of the seventh or eighth layer of laws at the mortal level. There was also no lack of existences whose cultivation was extremely low, but who could comprehend higher levels. These existences had originally been tightly restricted by the layers of laws, and their potential could not be unleashed at all. In the end, they might have died of depression due to some accident, and lost their original unlimited development possibilities. But now, with these clusters of worlds, the situation was different. In this cosmos group, to be able to break through all the restrictions, this kind of genius would naturally be able to comprehend more and obtain more. In the end, they might even be able to greatly increase the power of this world's upper echelons, of course. This was just a casual move that Luo Fan took. It did not matter to him what effect it could achieve or how great it was. In the next few years, Luo Fan continued to walk between the heavens and the earth. Occasionally, when he found something good, he would stop and casually deal with it. He made all sorts of strange things evolve there, forming all sorts of scenes of different natures. When to stop, when to start walking, what methods to use to change the place, whether to change it, and so on and so forth. All of this was done casually and according to his heart, but there was no complete plan at all. And this led to a result, which was, in the past few years, there were all sorts of creatures in this world. Something attractive to some cultivators appeared. As a result, the many living beings and cultivators became much livelier than before. The world that was about to turn into stagnant water was unknowingly activated during this process. Luo Fan didn't try to hide his actions, although his actions were very subtle and hard to detect. However, after all, his actions were too many, and the number of changes was also too many. Therefore, after a few years, his existence was finally discovered by the 7 supreme martial emperors of this world. On this day, Luo Fan was standing in front of a deep pool. Suddenly, the void trembled and layers of multicolored light descended from the sky, falling into the deep pool. Following that, one figure after another gradually walked out from the light. Finally, all 7 men and women appeared before Luo Fan and looked at Luo Fan with an indescribable gaze. You should have guessed my identity by now, right? Luo Fan looked at them and smiled faintly. This world was created by him, so he had supreme authority here. Nothing in this world could hide from him, even if he was just a mortal. Moreover, he was a level 3 supreme ruler who had grasped the connate, inextinguishable spiritual light. His strength was hundreds or even thousands of times stronger than the supreme rulers before him. In such a state, how could the actions of these 7 supreme emperors escape his notice? The expressions of the 7 supreme emperors became a little excited. They bowed to Luo Fan one by one, greeting their creator. You've done well in the years I wasn't here. Now that this world has grown to this level, it's all thanks to you. Luo Fan smiled faintly and said, these supreme emperors had completely taken Luo Fan's worldview as their own worldview, and they had grown based on the development of the worldview. Luo Fan had an indescribable sense of intimacy towards them. Therefore, his attitude towards him was rather good, as if they were his own disciples. Even Luo Fan felt this way, so the feelings of these supreme rulers would only be stronger and even more uncontrollable. If that wasn't the case, why would the 7 of them appear before Luo Fan at the same time instead of letting 1 or 2 of them test the waters before making a decision? Thank you for your compliment, Creator. This is what we should do. The 7 men and women couldn't hide their excitement. However, the upcoming 8th tribulation will be the greatest challenge this world has faced since its creation. You must be prepared, Luo Fan said to them with a slightly solemn expression. The 8th apocalypse of heaven and earth. The Supreme Emperor's expressions changed drastically. Although they had already helped this world survive the 7th tribulation, the previous tribulations made them clearly aware of the changes of this world's tribulation. Laurel City, these people, even the 7th great tribulation of the heavens and earth had barely survived. Now that they heard that the 8th tribulation was coming, it went without saying how they felt. May I ask, Creator, when will the 8th tribulation descend? One of the female supreme sovereigns asked. Hearing this, Luo Fan smiled faintly and said, based on the development of this world, there are still 8 billion years. 8 billion years. Hearing this, the 7 supreme rulers' expressions relaxed. 8 billion years. Hearing this, the expressions of the 7 supreme martial emperors relaxed. After all, they couldn't compare to the supreme rulers in that perfect world. Every one of them had experienced billions of trillions of years of time. Even the oldest among them had only lived for tens of billions of years. For people like them, 8 billion years was not considered a short period of time. Seeing their expressions relax, Luo Fan sighed slightly in his heart. He knew that the foundation of this world was ultimately not as good as that of other worlds. Even in the Earth universe, when those pseudo-sage saints heard that there would be a great tribulation of heaven and earth in more than 3 billion years, they would feel an indescribable sense of urgency. In that perfect world, when those supreme emperors heard this, they would feel as if they were taking a nap and the tribulation would arrive. However, in this world that they had created, the strongest supreme rulers actually felt relaxed about these 8 billion years. They actually felt that this time was very long, from the small to the big. One could naturally see what their understanding of time was like. Luo Fan didn't show this attitude of his. After all, this concept of time could only be changed after experiencing it. Now, even if he said that 8 billion years would pass very quickly, and that it would be gone in a nap, they wouldn't take it to heart. Even if they displayed an extremely urgent attitude on the surface, they would definitely be relaxed in their hearts. If that was the case, why waste their saliva and energy? At that moment, he just said, however, according to my calculations of this world, even with me, the possibility of this world surviving the 8th tribulation of the world is less than 5%. These words, in an instant, the expressions of the 7 supreme rulers changed drastically. Less than 5%. They almost exclaimed at the same time. 5%. This was a very small probability, no matter where it was. Not to mention that it was in this world. Although, these supreme rulers had already barely helped this world survive the 7th tribulation of the world. According to their own strength, the possibility of surviving the 8th tribulation of the world was indeed very small. However, after all, there was still this Creator who was countless times more powerful than them here, wasn't there? Because of Luo Fan, they naturally had that inexplicable expectation about whether this world could survive the 8th tribulation of the world. Now that their expectations have been dashed, how could they not be shocked? At this time, how could they still look relaxed? This was like a person who clearly knew that he was going to die. But if he knew the specific day of his death, he would inevitably feel a sense of urgency in his heart and would inevitably want to try his best to prolong the date of death. Even if that date might be a few decades later, there would be no exception. Right now, these supreme rulers were clearly in this situation. Previously, when they heard that the tribulation of the world would only descend in 8 billion years, they felt that there was still a long time and naturally felt relaxed. But now that they heard that the possibility of surviving the tribulation of the world was so small, they naturally understood that the 8 billion years was not the time of the tribulation of the world, but the time of their own death. How could their mentality not change? Creator, please save us. These supreme sovereigns bowed to Luo Fan one by one and said. Seeing their behavior, Luo Fan smiled and said, "Do you still think that it's a long time?" These words caused the faces of the supreme sovereigns to turn red. That's too short a time. Luo Fan's smile unknowingly turned into a sigh. He said, "This is the limit of this world. When I first opened up this world, because I used a trick, the foundation of this world itself was extremely weak. To be able to survive the 7th tribulation of the world is already beyond my expectations. It's just too difficult for him to survive the 8th Great Tribulation. Isn't there still a 5% chance of success? Is there no way to increase this 5%? The female supreme ruler said with great anticipation. This 5%. I've already used all methods to calculate and increase the success rate. Under normal circumstances, it's not even 1 in 10,000, Luo Fan said faintly. Hearing this, despair appeared on the faces of the few of them. Luo Fan shook his head. Forget it. After all, there is still a 5% chance. We can't give up. Next, all of you need to work hard and increase your cultivation level as much as possible. That's the only way to increase the success rate. Increase my Tao cultivation realm? At this moment, the supreme rulers smiled bitterly. Luo Fan frowned. Creator, it's not that we don't want to work hard to increase our cultivation level. It's just that we are all stuck at a bottleneck. No matter how hard we try, we are stuck here. It's been tens of thousands of years since we felt any progress in our cultivation level. Now, we are even wondering if there's a realm above us. One of the supreme rulers smiled bitterly. Hearing this, Luo Fan couldn't help but laugh. There's no realm above us? What a joke. This caused the expressions of the supreme emperors to turn solemn. This wasn't because they were angered by Luo Fan's words. It was because they knew that this was a rare opportunity. From what Luo Fan said next, they would definitely be able to obtain some of the benefits they were looking forward to. There is no limit to cultivation. Luo Fan's expression became unprecedentedly firm. His eyes were burning as he looked at the 7 supreme emperors in front of him, who had a very close relationship with him. His expression was as if he was speaking the absolute truth. There is no limit. The 7 supreme rulers were deep in thought. That's right. No matter what level you cultivate to, even if you're at the true sage level, there must be a higher realm and a possibility of improvement. You can't find a higher realm, and you can't find a possibility of improvement. Then there was only one possibility, and that was, you're on the wrong path. Luo Fan said very seriously. These words fell into the ears of the 7 supreme sovereigns. However, it was like a thunderclap that shook the heavens, instantly causing the 7 supreme emperors to reveal expressions of extreme shock on their faces. There is no limit. I'm on the wrong path. They all murmured. There was hope and despair in the depths of their eyes. They hoped that they knew that they could continue cultivating online and that they still had a goal to strive for. What made them feel despair was that they suddenly started to doubt whether they had taken the wrong path from the start. Only you know the path that you're cultivating. If it was before, I could still guide you. But now, I'm on a completely different path from you. There's nothing that can guide you anymore. Therefore, you can only rely on yourselves for your cultivation from now on, Luo Fan said with some regret. In the past, Luo Fan had memorized countless principles and mysteries of the true sage level. Any one of them would be enough for these supreme rulers to comprehend. If that had been the case, it would have been a matter of minutes if he wanted to guide them and preach to them. However, it was different now. He had already completely destroyed all of his understanding of the true saint stage, and there was nothing left for them to listen to. It was because of this that Luo Fan said such words. Chapter 1762. Luo Fan naturally wasn't interested in explaining. He merely said, although I can't guide you, creating a good place for you to cultivate isn't a problem. Hearing this, the 7 supreme emperors were pleasantly surprised and expectant. With a thought, a bit of the connate, inextinguishable spirit light was instantly guided out by him and poured into the deep pool before him. As this bit of connate, inextinguishable spirit light poured in, the deep pool began to churn rapidly. Within it, pieces of heaven and earth, worlds, and space-time began to form rapidly. In the blink of an eye, the originally deep pool had already turned into a cluster of worlds made up of billions of worlds. All the worlds, heaven and earth, and space-time within this cluster of worlds vaguely corresponded to the worlds within the connate, inextinguishable spirit light. Although the principles and mysteries contained within weren't exactly the same as all the worlds within the connate, inextinguishable spirit light, they already contained a large portion of the principles and mysteries within. If these supreme emperors were to enter and cultivate, it would naturally be impossible for them to completely comprehend the principles and mysteries within the connate, inextinguishable spirit light. However, if they wanted to further improve their cultivation, it wouldn't be a problem at all. These worlds weren't actually created by Luo Fan. Fundamentally speaking, they were evolved from the power of the connate, inextinguishable spirit light. The power of the connate, inextinguishable spirit light contained a large portion of the mysteries of the connate, inextinguishable spirit light. After it was activated by Luo Fan, it naturally combined with the power of the deep pool and naturally changed the structure of the space-time within the deep pool, as well as the structure of the nomological laws. As a result, these worlds were constructed, and the principles and mysteries contained within these worlds were clearly the reflection of the principles and mysteries within this power, seeing such an unbelievable change in the deep pool. The Supreme Emperors were all astonished. Even though they were already second-level Supreme Emperors, they were still restricted by the nomological laws in this world. Yet, they still couldn't do what Luo Fan had done, and now it was right in front of them. The Creator had only casually pointed his finger, and the seemingly ordinary deep pool had turned into a huge cluster of worlds. How could they not be shocked by such a bizarre change? After Luo Fan opened up the Cosmos group, he said to the 7 of them, "This place contains the secrets to further your cultivation. You may enter and comprehend it." Hearing this, the 7 supreme martial emperors all revealed looks of excitement. One by one, they kowtowed to Luo Fan and thanked him profusely. Luo Fan smiled faintly. With a wave of his hand, those supreme emperors were thrown into the world cluster in the deep pool below without the slightest ability to resist. They were thrown into different worlds. At the last moment, in order for them to comprehend all of this better, Luo Fan had sealed their powers, so that they could only regain their powers through cultivating the cultivation system of the world cluster and unleash extraordinary god art power. Those supreme martial emperors were planning to show off their powers, but they didn't expect to suddenly turn into ordinary people. None of them could react in time and almost lost their lives as they were smashed into the world cluster. They were all in an extremely sorry state. However, even though they had been tricked by Luo Fan, they still didn't dare to say anything bad to Luo Fan. It was just that each of them looked extremely helpless. Seeing them step into the world cluster one by one, Luo Fan only smiled faintly. He turned around and left the deep pool, no longer paying attention to them. What he said before, that the world's 8th calamity would arrive in 8 billion years, was not a lie. Even if he joined in, the world's chances of surviving the calamity were less than 5%. That was also true. At this very moment, as he walked between the heavens and the earth, he observed the various mysteries of the world he had created. On the other hand, he was preparing for the 8th calamity in the future. After all, he was the one who had opened up the world. Even though he didn't place as much importance on this world as he used to, he no longer really regarded it as an indispensable existence. However, he still had a lot of feelings for this world. Of course, he didn't want to watch this world be destroyed in front of him, and he didn't want this world to eventually disappear in the calamity. If he couldn't do it, then there was nothing he could do. However, If he could help this world improve its chances of surviving the calamity with just a little effort, he would definitely not be stingy. Therefore, in the next tens of millions of years, Luo Fan acted as an otherworldly expert and began to walk around the world. He left behind special modified places everywhere, allowing more and more cultivators to comprehend the principles and mysteries that they originally couldn't comprehend from the special modified places he left behind. This allowed the cultivation civilization of this world to take another step forward on the already extremely prosperous foundation. Because of his various actions, he gradually left behind many legends about him in this world. There were countless legends about who met Luo Fan at some time, then turned over a new leaf and soared into the sky. Of course, among the many cultivators who had received his favors, there were many false saints and desperation cultivators. Or to be more precise, most of those who had received his favors were false saints or desperation cultivators. After all, these were the higher-ups of this world, and they were also the true reliance for surviving the eighth calamity. Although the improvement of other cultivators was also beneficial, their strength was still insufficient. If they wanted to convert it into true strength, they would have to go through too many twists and turns, and the efficiency was too low. On this day, Luo Fan finally left behind a cloud space above the nine heavens, and he left enough guidance for cultivators to become false saints. All of a sudden, the world trembled. An indescribable joy came from the depths of the world. The great Tao that Luo Fan was extremely familiar with started to jump crazily at this moment, as if it was rejoicing for something that had happened. What's going on? Luo Fan frowned and thought to himself. The change in this world was beyond his expectations, and he was at a loss for a moment. However, Luo Fan was the creator of this world. After all, very soon, he found the source of this change, and he couldn't help but show some joy on his face. I can actually become a level 3 emperor? His figure moved. With a light step, he crossed a distance of countless light years in the blink of an eye. He directly arrived at the deep pool that he had transformed into a world cluster. Here, he discovered that the world cluster had started to shake violently. All kinds of indescribable fluctuations kept coming out from it. The multicolored light that appeared in the void was centered on this place, and the great Tao was also vibrating the most intensely in the corresponding place. Immediately after, an inexplicable aura slowly emitted from it. This aura was so grand and vast. In the blink of an eye, it had already swept across the entire world, causing all living beings in this world to feel an indescribable sense of awe from the bottom of their hearts. This kind of awe was so powerful, and the way it appeared was so strange. However, almost all living beings involuntarily knelt in this direction, welcoming the birth of the strongest expert in this world. Immediately after, the figure of a man slowly walked out of the world cluster. An eternal and indestructible charm slowly emanated from this person's body at this moment. This aura seemed to vaguely change the nature of this world when it was added to the aura. This figure, it was one of the 7 supreme emperors from back then. This person slowly stepped out of the world cluster, and his entire body was surrounded by an indescribable majesty. It was as if the world was changing, and even the nomological law layer seemed to be completely connected. I've already broken through, he murmured with a face full of joy. You can now be considered a level 3 Supreme Emperor, Luo Fan said faintly. His words instantly caused the aura on his body to disappear completely, causing the multicolored light in the sky and the vibration of the great Tao to disappear completely. Everything was because of what Luo Fan said. He had completely returned to his previous appearance. It was as if nothing had happened. Greetings, Lord Creator. What do you mean by level 3 Supreme Emperor? The Supreme Emperor was stunned at first. Then, he said to Luo Fan. Hearing this, Luo Fan only smiled. He said, False Sage, Despairing One, Supreme Emperor. These are the 3 realms of ascension. Among them, there are 3 realms of Supreme Emperor. Level 1 Supreme Emperor, Level 2, Supreme Emperor, and Level 3, Supreme Emperor. Before this, the few of you were Level 2, Supreme Emperor. Now that you've broken through and comprehended the mystery of connate indestructibility, you can already be considered a Level 3 Supreme Emperor. The mystery of connate indestructibility, Level 3 Supreme Emperor. The Supreme Emperor looked shocked. He originally thought that he had already achieved a huge breakthrough and that the gap between him and the Creator had been narrowed to an undetectable level. However, he didn't expect the Creator to still be so much stronger than him. He still didn't know what level the Creator was at, and it seemed like the Creator could look down on all his cultivation. How could he not be shocked by this? At this moment, Level 2 Supreme Emperors stepped out from the world group and appeared beside the Level 3 Supreme Emperor. They had also heard Luo Fan's words. At this moment, their expressions were filled with an inexplicable longing. Then, after 8 billion years, will our chances of surviving the calamity of the world have increased? Asked the Level 3 Supreme Emperor. That's right, there has indeed been an increase. However, not much, not even 5%, said Luo Fan with a smile. It was beyond his expectations that one of these Level 2 Supreme Emperors could achieve a breakthrough in just a few tens of millions of years, bypass the requirement of the connate indestructibility aura, comprehend the mystery of connate indestructibility, and become a Level 3 Supreme Emperor. According to his original calculations, it was impossible for Supreme Emperors like them to achieve such a breakthrough. At most, they would just have a slight increase in their cultivation level. Originally, this calculation had a 5% chance of success. Now that they could achieve a breakthrough, their chances would naturally increase. Hearing Luo Fan's words, the Supreme Sovereigns all revealed looks of pleasant surprise. That's great. However, the few of you can't relax. This kind of progress is very important. This kind of progress is beyond my expectations. It represents a bit of hope. However, if you guys relax, this bit of hope will disappear. Luo Fan said solemnly. Yes, everyone answered in unison. Luo Fan nodded and turned to the Level 3 Supreme Emperor. You won't be of much use cultivating here anymore. I'll send you to another place to cultivate. The Level 3 Supreme Emperor's eyes lit up. Creator, please grant me my wish. Luo Fan smiled faintly and poked the void. In an instant, layers of laws were instantly broken, revealing a passageway leading to the unseen world. It was instantly created. This world was different from any other world. The layers of laws not only allowed the living beings in this world to comprehend the mysteries of each layer of laws, but at the same time, it also completely restricted the unseen world. This restriction made it impossible for any living being in this world to step into the unseen world and directly comprehend the Great Path. Apart from the creator of this world, Luo Fan. Therefore, even though this Supreme Emperor had cultivated for such a long time and his cultivation realm had increased to this level, he had never stepped into the unseen world even once. He couldn't even touch it himself. To personally comprehend the Great Path of this world, that's the aura of the Great Path. At this moment, all the Supreme Emperor's faces twitched. Their eyes were filled with anticipation. Go on in. Next, you can directly touch the Great Path to cultivate and comprehend it, Luo Fan said faintly. It's really the Great Path. The Level 3 Supreme Emperor's face was flushed with excitement. At this moment, he didn't care about anything else and directly stepped into the passageway. In the blink of an eye, he had already stepped into the unseen world and arrived at the Great Path. He began to bask in the endless principles and mysteries of the Great Path. This Great Path was the true Great Path of the perfect world. It contained a lot of mysteries of the true sage level. There were countless mysteries of the true sage level. To Luo Fan, who had completely destroyed his understanding of the true sage level in the past, this was naturally of no use. However, to this Level 3 Supreme Emperor who had never comprehended the mysteries of the true sage level, this was simply heaven. At this moment, he was like a sponge, madly absorbing the endless principles and mysteries around him. He tried his best to integrate these principles and mysteries into his soul. His cultivation realm actually began to increase bit by bit. After Luo Fan sent him into the unseen world to directly comprehend the Great Path, he casually closed his hands. The laws that penetrated through the layers of laws instantly closed up like the passageway in the unseen world and completely disappeared. Turning his head, he saw the other 6 Supreme Emperor's expressions of anticipation and desire. Luo Fan only said faintly, "Although you will be able to gain something by entering there now, it won't be comparable to the worlds below. It's better to wait until you have also broken through. Then I will send you over." Hearing his words, the Supreme Emperors all looked a little disappointed. However, they all understood Luo Fan's arrangements. Immediately, they expressed that they understood and bid farewell to Luo Fan. One by one, they turned around and stepped into the world below to continue cultivating. Looking at the few of them who were more motivated than before, Luo Fan only smiled and thought to himself, "Looks like no matter what level one is at, one needs to be motivated in order to stimulate more potential." Now, he was already looking forward to when they could become level 3 Supreme Emperors. With a thought, his will instantly swept across the entire world. In an instant, all the false sages and desperators in this world instantly knew that there was a cultivation place in this place that could allow them to become Supreme Emperors. In an instant, the entire world became lively. It was unknown how many false saints and desperation realm cultivators were rushing toward this location. At this moment, Luo Fan's figure flashed and disappeared from this world group. The principles and mysteries contained in this world group were all-encompassing, and any cultivator could obtain the comprehension they needed here. The reason why he didn't let all the false sages and desperators come here to cultivate previously was because he felt that this location was not as special as the other places he had opened up for them. The reason why he changed his mind now was because the principles and mysteries contained in this world group had potential that exceeded his imagination. At the very least, this was the case for the living beings in this world. In that case, if they entered early to comprehend, in the future, there might be a greater possibility of becoming a level 3 Supreme Emperor. The facts prove that Luo Fan's guess was correct. In the next 10 million years, in this world group, there were actually more than 10 desperators who broke through and stepped into the level of the Supreme Emperor. As for the false sages who broke through and became desperators, there were even more of them. There were over 100 of them. The world would rejoice for a period of time with the accomplishments of every single Supreme Emperor. As a result, there would be all sorts of unusual phenomena occurring in the world over the past tens of millions of years, causing the world to vaguely become livelier and livelier. On this day, Luo Fan finally walked through all the places in this world. He also finally left a special place in all the areas that he needed to leave a special place for. However, he finally had some free time and returned to the world group. It's actually become so lively. Looking down at the extremely prosperous scene that appeared around the deep pool below, Luo Fan felt a little emotional. This deep pool had obviously become a supreme, holy land of this world. In the surroundings, many powerful forces had set up their headquarters here. Between the countless worlds in the deep pool, almost every false sage, every despair, and every Supreme Emperor had placed their bets on it. They wandered, comprehended, and cultivated among the countless principles and mysteries derived from the power of the connate indestructible spiritual light. Luo Fan floated above the void. He was only a few hundred feet away from the deep pool. However, not a single living being, not a single cultivator, could discover his existence. This was not because he used his supreme authority as the creator of this world to hide himself. It was because, right now, his own strength, or rather, his cultivation realm, had already reached this level. It was enough for him to possess this kind of power. When he didn't want to be discovered by anyone, even a third-grade monarch wouldn't be able to discover his existence. He already had this ability when he returned to this world tens of millions of years ago. However, back then, he definitely wouldn't be able to do it so easily. It was like instinct. In other words, compared to back then, the current him had already made great progress. This was almost inevitable. Everything in this world had evolved according to the worldview of laws. And after this world had been tempered and evolved time and time again, it was equivalent to perfecting his worldview of laws again and again. Although it couldn't be truly perfected due to the fact that his instincts were perfected, however, a large part of it could complement Luo Fan's current worldview of laws. In the process of Luo Fan continuously walking in this world and continuously transforming this world, these had unknowingly infiltrated his body and mind. Then, they reacted on his worldview of laws, causing his worldview to be unknowingly perfected in this process. For the current Luo Fan, his cultivation was the cultivation of his worldview. Perfecting his worldview was equivalent to improving his cultivation realm. That was why this type of thing happened. He was just walking between heaven and earth, only changing heaven and earth, his cultivation level continuously rising. At this moment, with this deep pool as the center, boundless multicolored light appeared in this world. This multicolored light was more intense than any other multicolored light that had appeared in this world in the past tens of millions of years. In this multicolored light, the joy of heaven and earth was incomparably clearly revealed. In the unseen world, the great path once again began to jump cheerfully. All kinds of phenomena all indicated one fact, and that was another Level 2 Supreme Emperor had broken through the limit and become a Level 3 Supreme Emperor. After tens of millions of years, there's finally another successful breakthrough. A faint smile hung on Luo Fan's face when he saw this scene. Chapter 1763. At this moment, a woman's figure broke through one of the worlds in the cluster of worlds. Her figure enlarged infinitely as she broke free from the cluster of worlds and appeared directly on the surface of the deep pool. After this figure appeared, the phenomenon in the world became even more intense. Vaguely, there were even all sorts of bell chimes reverberating between heaven and earth. All sorts of strange phenomena that had taken place in the past began to appear one after another at this moment. As this figure appeared, more and more figures leaped out of the deep pool and appeared around the woman. At the same time, the powerhouses of the various forces around the deep pool appeared one by one. However, they were far inferior to the Supreme Emperors after all. After they appeared, they could only watch from afar and did not dare to approach. In an instant, countless gazes were directed at this location from all directions. After a while, the phenomenon disappeared. The woman let out a long sigh. Although it's thousands of years slower, it's still a success after all. At this moment, Luo Fan's figure slowly appeared in front of her. When she saw Luo Fan appear, the woman's previous complacency disappeared instantly and was replaced with respect. She bowed to Luo Fan and said, "Greetings, Creator. Not bad. You've really worked hard all these years to achieve a breakthrough in such a short time." Luo Fan smiled. "It's all thanks to the Creator for opening up this cluster of worlds. If it wasn't for this cluster of worlds, I wouldn't have been able to break through no matter how hard I worked," the woman hurriedly said. Hearing this, Luo Fan just smiled and said, "There's no need to talk about this anymore. I don't need to say more about what to do next." As he spoke, he casually clapped his hand. In the void, a passage that penetrated through the layers of laws and laws appeared naturally and brazenly poured into the unseen world. It directly arrived at the place where the path was. At this moment, the Level 3 Emperor from back then was already here. At this moment, when she saw the passage appear, her eyes couldn't help but flash. With a light step, she appeared at the other end of the passage and bowed to Luo Fan from afar. Luo Fan just nodded, and then he gazed at the woman who'd just become a third-rank monarch. The woman looked rather excited. He thanked Luo Fan once more, and then he stepped into the passageway and vanished from this world. After sending her into the passageway, Luo Fan smiled and closed his hand. The passageway suddenly closed and disappeared in the blink of an eye. The entire process was witnessed by countless people. For a time, Waves surged in the hearts of the cultivators who saw all of this, and all sorts of indescribable impulses arose in them. Everyone's attitude changed completely in the blink of an eye. The thirst for breakthrough. It became even more intense, and his cultivation will become even more resolute. After Luo Fan finished this, he did not stay here for long. In a flash, he had already disappeared from everyone's sight. After seeing Luo Fan disappear, the few Supreme Emperors sighed regretfully, turned around, and re-entered the world cluster in the deep pool to begin a new round of cultivation. Previously, the woman who was originally at the same level as them had brazenly crossed the limit and stepped into a level that they couldn't understand. To them, this in itself was an extremely strong stimulation. Naturally, it made them very motivated. As for the other false saints in desperation who were watching all of this, they all began to discuss. All of them had indescribable expectations and longing. They imagined when they could be like that woman and directly step into the unseen world. They wanted to go to the place where the great Tao was and personally comprehend it. At this moment, Luo Fan did not leave. Instead, he was still above the void of the deep pool. It was just that he had concealed his figure again. He floated above the void and looked at everything that was happening below at this moment, feeling rather satisfied. If this goes on, there should be a higher chance of surviving the 8th Great Tribulation of Heaven and Earth one. 8 billion years later, right? As he thought of this, a smile appeared on his face. With a slight thought, he raised his hand and pointed. A ray of light instantly penetrated the void and landed somewhere in the void, disappearing without a trace in the blink of an eye. At this moment, the sound of a baby crying could be heard from that location. Then, a tiny baby appeared out of nowhere from that spot. At the same time, the surrounding people suddenly came here unknowingly. For some reason, they felt that the person in front of them was the young master they had been searching for many years. As if they had seen a treasure, they directly picked up the baby and returned to their homes to take care of him, like their young master. This baby was none other than Luo Fan's clone. However, this time, he had removed all of his power and almost all of his will, leaving only a sliver of his will behind. After this transformation, apart from the fact that the baby still knew how to think, it was completely an ordinary baby. The reason he did this was very simple. He wanted to rely on the growth of this baby and experience the changes of the world's laws through the tempering and metamorphosis of the Great Tribulation of Heaven and Earth. He wanted to deepen his understanding of the world's laws through this experience so that his world's laws could be further tempered and improved. In just a short few decades, this baby had grown into a great hero in the mortal world. He began to be praised by the living beings of this generation through his heroic deeds. However, one day, this baby accidentally offended a large local force while doing heroic deeds. After being strangled by dozens of people, he died a violent death and turned back into a speck of light. Under Luo Fan's control, he landed in another location and turned into a baby again. He was taken care of by others again and went through a new round of growth, or rather, a new round of reincarnation, and so on and so forth. He reincarnated again and died again and again. Finally, after 1,000,000 years, Luo Fan's heart trembled, and he suddenly felt his vision become clear. He found that his world's laws seemed to have made progress with the naked eye. At this moment, the space-time around his body suddenly fluctuated subtly. A kind of subtle change appeared in the space-time and began to spread continuously, gradually engulfing the entire world, causing the fundamental structure of this world to undergo some subtle changes. This change was so subtle that none of the living beings in this world could detect it. But at the same time, this change was real. He was changing the world in front of him, causing it to look different from before. When he discovered this, an inexplicable smile appeared on Luo Fan's face. I finally gained something. After secretly calculating in his heart, he found that the success rate of this world's 8th world's laws had increased a little. As for his strength, because of this change, it had increased by a large margin. Sure enough, it's useful. This thought was engraved in his heart at this moment. At this moment, He had a brother in his heart. He raised his hand and pointed, and an unknown number of invisible rays of light rushed out from his hand. They fell everywhere in this world, turned into babies, and began countless reincarnations at the same time. For a moment, all kinds of completely different experiences poured into his heart, and all kinds of indescribable stimuli simultaneously stimulated his life and stimulated his world's laws. Time passed slowly. 1,000,000 years, 10,000,000 years, 100,000,000 years. In the blink of an eye, 900,000,000 years had passed. On this day, Luo Fan's heart shook, and he suddenly felt an inexplicable feeling of weakness. This feeling of weakness brought him back to his senses in an instant. With a jolt of his heart, he understood what had happened. This was clearly because the number of deaths of those clones had reached the limit, but they could no longer continue to reincarnate. It's only 900,000,000 years, and it's already not enough? Luo Fan frowned. The situation in front of him, but it was somewhat beyond his expectations. Although these clones only contained a bit of his will, they were not his real clones. It wasn't his real clone, and its power was billions of times weaker than his real clone. But, after all, it was his will. Its power itself was also extremely powerful. In his original thought, such a will, even if it could not resist the impact of the destruction of the world, would certainly be able to exist almost forever. Who would have thought that after 900,000,000 years, these were already exhausted and could not continue to exist? With a thought, Luo Fan raised his hand and waved. In an instant, the countless will that he had scattered to various parts of the world instantly crossed the void and came straight in front of him, directly spreading out like stars. Of course, these were not completely synchronized and showed signs of exhaustion, but only about half of them showed such signs. However, at this moment, the remaining will that had not yet shown such signs had already greatly reduced their vitality, as if they were already bearing an indescribable burden. From this appearance, it was obvious that they were not far from exhaustion. Luo Fan frowned slightly and began to carefully observe the various previous experiences of these will. Among these will, those that showed signs of exhaustion were the ones that had the most number of reincarnations. For example, the will that was on the verge of collapse and could barely take shape had already reincarnated nearly 80,000,000 times. On average, it would reincarnate once every 10 years. So that's how it is. Every time it dies, every time it is reborn, it will leave traces on this will, just like the growth rings of a tree. Once the density of these traces reaches the point where this will can no longer bear it, it will weaken and collapse. Looking at this scene, Luo Fan's eyes narrowed, and he thought to himself. He raised his hand and gently waved, and the will that was about to collapse fell into his hand. He touched the void, and the worldview instantly poured into this will. In an instant, there was a loud bang and a violent explosion. It exploded and was directly turned into nothingness by the powerful shockwave. Even the worldview can't help. Luo Fan looked at this scene, and his expression became more and more unsightly. The worldview was originally sorted out and perfected by Luo Fan bit by bit, and now it had already integrated with his body and mind. He relied on this integration to resist all kinds of erosion and impact that he could not resist before. Normally speaking, if his psyche was infused with this worldview, the stability of his psyche should be greatly enhanced. The signs of collapse should have completely disappeared. Now that this situation had emerged, it obviously meant that a problem beyond his expectations had appeared. His heart stirred slightly. Once again, he grabbed two more consciousnesses. Of these two, one showed no signs of collapse, and the other was on the verge of collapse. Luo Fan's heart stirred slightly, and a worldview directly poured into these two will. In an instant, the will that showed no signs of collapse began to quickly stabilize, and the traces of death and rebirth that existed like growth rings began to be erased one after another. The will that was already on the verge of collapse suddenly shook and exploded in an instant. Amidst the loud bangs, a strong shock wave began to sweep in all directions. Looking at this completely different performance, Luo Fan fell into deep thought. At this time, he no longer had the mood to continue staying above this deep pool. Anyway, these years, the Supreme Emperors had successfully broken through and were sent to the Great Path to directly comprehend the mysteries of the Great Path. Therefore, he casually covered all the will, and then with a thought, he went straight through the layers of laws and stepped into the void above the 8th layer of laws and laws. After arriving here, he casually waved his hand. An absolutely empty, absolutely stable space-time that was completely isolated from the outside world appeared in this void. After that, he directly entered this space-time and conveniently spread out his thoughts, allowing them to instinctively spread out in the space-time. After these will appeared, they naturally separated into two camps. One was the one that showed no signs of collapse, and the other was the one that was already on the verge of collapse. After separating, these will vaguely huddled together, each seeming to have a faint fear and hatred for the other. As expected, looking at this scene, Luo Fan couldn't help but feel a little speechless. Although these two kinds of will were fundamentally the same existence, they had now become two completely different existences. They were already repelling each other. If they were to be divided according to the biological race under scientific theory, then the two would be like comparing apes and humans. Although the two had the same origin, but in the end, they had completely formed two different races. It was already impossible for them to coexist. Feeling helpless, Luo Fan began to carefully sense these will and began to analyze the nature of these will. He analyzed why these would show a completely different state under the infusion of the worldview. As he analyzed and experienced, his understanding of these two kinds of will became deeper and deeper. He also had a better understanding of the nature of these will. In the end, he discovered a somewhat surprising fact. If he were to use apes and humans as an analogy, then humans were not the ones that didn't show any signs of collapsing, but the ones that were on the verge of collapsing and being destroyed. Although these intents were heading towards destruction and collapse, their essence was actually higher than the intents that weren't heading towards destruction and collapse. Although there was such a difference in their states, if they were to fight, the will that was on the verge of collapse would definitely win. How is this possible? Looking at this scene, Luo Fan's face was full of shock. His heart stirred slightly, and the two will that belonged to two different sides began to rapidly enlarge in his eyes. Gradually, they enlarged from the originally insignificant specks of dust to the size of planets. They began to gradually rotate in front of him, constantly changing. After being magnified to this extent, the traces left behind by the will of death and rebirth were also magnified to the size of a huge mountain range. They began to emerge inside and outside of the will. At this moment, the will that was on the verge of collapse was already densely engraved with countless marks. In other words, there were countless mountain ranges growing on it. On the mountain range, most of the memories that he had experienced every time he died and was reborn were engraved on a mountain range. It could be said that every mountain range was a space-time. It was a world, and it was a piece of history. The will that was about to collapse and be destroyed were these space-time. The number of these worlds and these histories had reached a level that the will could not bear. In the end, it gradually changed shape, causing the will to gradually collapse and be destroyed. As for the will that had yet to reach this step, there were still many empty spaces on it, waiting for more mountains to descend, waiting for more space-time, more worlds, and more history to arrive. The nature of these two existences made these two will. It was as if they were two completely different planets. One of the planets had already developed to its limits, reaching a point where it could no longer bear the burden. If they were to ignore it, the planet would collapse due to its inability to bear the burden of development. As for the other planet, it was in the process of Ajan's development. Although it was already bearing the burden of the planet, there was still quite a bit of space for it to continue developing. There was still quite a bit of hope for it to reverse this fate of destruction. Looking at the state of existence of these two, Luo Fan gradually understood why these two had become two completely different existences. Why they would reject each other so much. The reason was simple. It was because of the traces of death and rebirth. It was not because of their wounds, but because of their wealth. For these the more such traces there were, the more wealth there was, not the more wounds there were. In this way, the wills that were on the verge of collapse were naturally much stronger than those that had yet to reach this step. And it was precisely because of this that the consciousnesses that were on the verge of collapse naturally wanted to protect their traces. Thus, they would reject the will that still had empty spaces, worried that they would snatch and devour them. As such, the consciousness that was on the verge of collapse would naturally reject the consciousness that wasn't on the verge of collapse. As for the will that was still in good condition, it was because they were still in good condition. The other party was already heading towards collapse, worried that the collapse would impact them and cause their own collapse. It was only natural that they would reject the other will. Thinking of this, Luo Fan did not know whether to laugh or cry. Although they are all my will, to think that there would be such a misunderstanding. He sighed. Of course, this was just the instinct of these will, and it was not something that would happen under Luo Fan's personal control. After understanding the reason why these will rejected each other, he also understood why these will behaved completely differently under the infusion of the world of laws. The will that was still in good condition still had many empty spaces on them, which could be occupied by the world of laws, and then continued to expand and assimilate all the traces, allowing the will and the traces to truly merge into one, turning them into the will itself. On the other hand, the will that was collapsing was different. They were already filled with the traces inside and out, and when the world of laws poured into them, there was no space to accommodate them at all. However, they did not have the time to assimilate the traces at all. They would first impact the traces, and then cause the will to collapse together with them. This was the root cause of the completely different performance of the two. But why is it that it is already unbearable after only 900 million years? Why are these wills so fragile? Such a thought flashed through Luo Fan's mind. With this thought in mind, he raised his hand and gently pointed, and a bit of will that was still in good condition rushed out of his hand. Just like the countless other consciousnesses, he withdrew all the thoughts that belonged to him. Only the instincts of the consciousnesses were left. After this will appeared, it unknowingly overrode the other will. It sank and floated at the top, slowly rotating and changing. This will was smooth, flawless, and crystal clear. As it rotated slightly, it faintly revealed an eternal charm, as if it could exist forever. Compared to the many will that were about to collapse or were in the process of collapsing, it formed a strong contrast. It made Luo Fan feel an inexplicable sense of annoyance, as if someone was mocking him to his face. Chapter 1764. In the end, my worldview is still not perfect enough. Luo Fan felt an inexplicable sense of helplessness at this moment. These thoughts were completely based on his worldview of the laws. The degree of its tenacity and endurance are completely linked to his worldview. Under such circumstances, the number of deaths and rebirths this thought withstands is naturally closely related to the degree of perfection of his worldview. The reason why he couldn't withstand tens of millions of deaths and rebirths in 900 million years is because his worldview is not perfect enough. His endurance for this kind of death and rebirth is insufficient. This was also the first time that Luo Fan had intuitively felt the shortcomings of his worldview. In the past, although he knew that his worldview was still not perfect enough for him to live freely in the chaotic state, he only relied on some kind of indescribable feeling and his own cultivation realm to measure it. He didn't know which aspects of his worldview were lacking and needed to be perfected. This time, after spending 900 million years, he finally saw the inadequacies of the world of laws and the areas that needed to be perfected. All kinds of thoughts flashed in his heart. He sighed, and with a move of his heart, the complete and undamaged thought that he had just released began to tremble slightly and slowly rotate. At the same time, Other thoughts began to pour into this thought one by one and began to fuse with it. This thought itself was extremely small, and it can even be said to be tens of thousands of times smaller than a speck of dust. But as time passed, as more and more will fused into it, the will gradually expanded. Its size gradually increased. Its size gradually became larger than a speck of dust. Even at this moment, there were still countless intents fusing with it, and those intents were constantly growing. It continued to enlarge. Finally, when all the thoughts were completely integrated into it, this thought has grown to the size of a fist. Floating in front of him, it looked like a legendary golden core. As Luo Fan's thought, its essence is so high that it's even higher than that of a grade 3 monarch. Now that it was floating here, it naturally released an indescribable majesty, causing this part of the world to tremble slightly under this majesty. These thoughts had fused into such a state, but Luo Fan still did not continue to integrate his thoughts into it. His will was still as pure as ever. It was still so clean, still under the control of his instincts. However, due to the fusion of too many other wills, the will was now covered in countless marks, as if it was filled with countless mountains, worlds, and space-time. All of these made the will feel a little overwhelmed at this moment. Floating in the sky, although there was an indescribable majesty, it was also on the verge of collapsing. The feeling of walking towards destruction. Looking at this will, Luo Fan raised his hand and waved, and the will fell into his hand. Zhang Xian's heart skipped a beat. He poured his thoughts into it. This will trembled slightly and began to gradually evolve. In the blink of an eye, it had turned into a will avatar. After this avatar appeared, it slightly trembled in the void, and endless laws began to rapidly pour into its body from all directions. As the countless laws poured in, the power in its body began to rapidly expand like a balloon. In a short while, it had already risen to a level comparable to the original body, and the aura it emitted was not the slightest bit inferior to that of the original body. It was similarly gigantic and terrifying. Moreover, this aura was not limited to this space-time, but spread out. It acted on the 8th layer of laws, causing it to tremble slightly. The few creatures that could comprehend the 8th layer of laws felt an indescribable pressure acting on their hearts, and their bodies began to tremble slightly. What is this? How could such a powerful existence suddenly be born in this world? Such thoughts emerged in the minds of many creatures. The existence that could comprehend the 8th layer of laws was at least a supreme monarch. To be able to make them feel this indescribable pressure and even make them lose control of their bodies, causing them to tremble slightly, it should at least be a level 3 supreme monarch that was many times stronger than them. Even after 900 million years, there are only 7 or 8 of such existences in the world. Their numbers were almost fixed. Now, there were actually 3 supreme emperors who were completely unfamiliar to them, yet they felt that they were even more powerful than the 7 or 8 supreme emperors they knew of. How could they not be shocked? How could they not have all sorts of inexplicable thoughts? Could it be that there will be a huge change in this world? Just as they were thinking about this, an indescribable pressure appeared in the hearts of all the creatures above the false sage level. This pressure was like the arrival of a storm. All the creatures in this world that could sense this pressure stopped what they were doing at this moment and looked at the sky one by one. That was the place where the supreme existence lived in their understanding. At the same time, the few level 3 supreme monarchs who were cultivating in the unseen world were also shocked. This feeling, it seems like a catastrophe is about to befall. The level 3 supreme monarch who first stepped into the unseen world to cultivate was the first to react and said with a rather ugly expression, "It indeed feels like a catastrophe is about to befall. But wasn't there still 900 million years until the next great tribulation? Could it be that I've been cultivating for too long and have forgotten the passage of time?" The second person who stepped into the unseen world, the female level 3 supreme monarch, frowned and said, "The unseen world was already completely different from before. Back then, there was only that great path in the unseen world. The other places were still empty and had no existence. But now, there were already 7 more cave abodes here. These 7 cave abodes were of different shapes. However, they were all very mysterious, and all of them were connected to that great path. Now, the 7 level 3 supreme monarchs were in these cave abodes. Above their cave abodes, their illusionary figures appeared. Each of the virtual images seemed to be many times larger than their actual bodies. Under the reflection of their virtual images, this vast and boundless unseen world actually looked like a small room. The great path below, under the virtual images, it looked like a pillar. Perhaps it's not a catastrophe. The level 3 supreme monarch who first entered said, "If it's not a catastrophe, then what could it be? Apart from the great tribulation of the heavens and earth, what other tribulation can make us feel so threatened?" Another level 3 supreme emperor said. The level 3 supreme monarch pointed upwards. This action instantly stunned everyone. Following that, a look of astonishment appeared on their faces. In this world, they had almost reached the pinnacle, apart from the Creator. In this way, the only tribulation that could strike such fear into their hearts was either the tribulation of the world itself, or it was the tribulation of the Creator of the world. Is that possible? The Creator is so powerful. Could there be a catastrophe? The level 3 supreme monarchs all had this thought in their minds. As they thought about this, the panic in their hearts intensified. One had to know that Luo Fan was already their goal, the motivation for their growth. Now that they suddenly knew their goal, the motivation for their growth actually had a catastrophe as well. They actually had to face a crisis of life and death. This made them start to have inexplicable doubts about their cultivation to that level. Was it right or wrong? Was it necessary to use that level as a goal? This thought made all of their expressions change unpredictably. As these level 3 supreme monarchs were constantly changing, in that space and time, Luo Fan also felt a feeling that he thought he would never feel again. The feeling of impending catastrophe. This feeling came from both his doppelganger and his main body. At this moment, he could faintly feel that there was an extremely terrifying power attacking him from the chaotic state. This power was terrifying. It even made him think of the catastrophe of the world. Back then, when he had survived the 2 catastrophes of the world in the untainted land, none of them had been as strong as this power before him. The catastrophe of the world was aimed at one side of the world. Now this power was completely aimed at him. Even mortals knew how huge the difference was between being scattered and being concentrated, let alone him. It could be said that this tribulation was thousands of times stronger than the great tribulation of the heavens and earth. Why is there a catastrophe? At this moment, he was completely confused. He did not know what this catastrophe was about. There was no time in the chaotic state, or rather, time was absolutely chaotic. Therefore, even though the speed of its descent did not seem to be very fast, in just a few thoughts, the catastrophe had already broken through the layers of barriers and poured into this space and time. At this moment, the entire world that Luo Fan had opened up shook violently. Even the great Tao in the unseen world began to shake violently at this moment. Ripples appeared on it, like the calm surface of a lake in a storm. One could tell at a glance how much impact this great path was withstanding. At the same time, the 7 level 3 supreme emperors who had opened up cave abodes on the great path felt a terrifying power erupt from the great path. It rushed into their cave abodes and caused them to tremble. Countless cracks appeared on them. Before long, under the disbelieving gazes of the 7 level 3 supreme emperors, the cave abodes completely collapsed and turned into the finest powder. In the blink of an eye, they had completely disappeared. Only the few of them and the great path, which was trembling crazily and covered in countless ripples, were left in the unseen world. The catastrophe has arrived. This thought instantly appeared in everyone's mind. With this thought, every one of them began to panic. Just the arrival of the catastrophe had already brought such a huge impact on them. If it were to completely erupt, how terrifying would the changes be? This made every one of them shocked and afraid. In this unseen world, they could sense everything that was happening in this world. In other words, everything in a law layer, everything in the normal space and time, apart from the various special places that Luo Fan had transformed back then, as well as the cave abode that he had opened up. Therefore, they didn't need to leave the unseen world to see everything that was happening in this world. They would be able to understand what was happening in this world and find the source of the catastrophe. In an instant, the seven of them had already locked their gazes on the space-time that Luo Fan had opened up as a cave abode. In other words, the layer of space-time above the eighth law layer. However, even though they were so curious and wanted to find out everything, they still weren't strong enough, and they didn't have enough authority. They couldn't see through the space-time at all to see what was happening inside. They could only feel all sorts of indescribable fluctuations constantly coming from that space-time, constantly affecting everything in this world. It was as if the world had fallen into the end of the world in an instant. Now that the world had developed to such a level, all relationships had become incomparably tight. These 7 level 3 Supreme Emperors were the strongest experts in this world, and they had cultivated in this world for such a long time. They had connections with almost all the cultivators in this world. It could be said that almost 70 to 80% of the cultivators in this world could all be considered their disciples and grand disciples. At this moment, they didn't dare to be negligent and began to transmit their wills. Their orders were transmitted to the false saints and those in despair, telling them to start making preparations and work hard to repair this world to prevent it from being damaged too much in this sudden change. When the false saints and despair heard their ancestral master's orders, they all seemed to have woken up from a dream. They recovered from the changes in the world and continued to transmit the orders. In just a few breaths, almost all the cultivators in this world started to move. They started to continuously strengthen this world and used all sorts of methods to prevent too many living beings from dying. They also prevented this world from being damaged too much in the process. Although the level of this world was extremely high, compared to this world, the many cultivators were so weak that they were almost unmanageable. However, they were living beings that were born and bred in this world after all. In this world, they had more or less some authority. Their busyness did not bring much benefit to the damage of this world in terms of power. However, their wills, their intentions, and their wishes were extremely comforting to the world, causing the world's ability to endure to be greatly strengthened. The feeling that the world was about to end gradually began to fade. Of course, it was only gradually fading. It was obviously impossible for it to completely disappear in the end. The source of all these changes, the space-time where Luo Fan was still there. The tribulation was still constantly lingering there, constantly erupting. How could all the changes caused by it disappear just like that? However, this was already enough to satisfy the 7 third-grade Supreme Emperors. At this moment, they looked at the great Tao that was still constantly trembling and rippling. Although their expressions were not too good, they were already much stronger than before. I really want to know what's going on in there. Where did that tribulation come from? A level 3 Supreme Emperor mumbled. These words resonated with the crowd. Each and every one of them had an inquisitive look on their faces. Now that they had calmed down, their hearts were no longer filled with shock, fear, and doubt like before. At this moment, they had already started to calmly think about what this tribulation would bring. Tribulation was a kind of misfortune. That was for sure. Anyone who encountered a tribulation would have a slim chance of survival. Once they failed, they would fall into an extremely terrible situation. This was something that every cultivator knew. But similarly, every cultivator also knew that a tribulation was also a kind of opportunity. If they couldn't overcome the tribulation, they would definitely obtain an outcome that no one wanted to see. But once they got past it, they would definitely obtain great benefits. After calming down, these third-grade Supreme Emperors had already thought of this. Right now, Luo Fan was much stronger than them. They could feel that. Luo Fan could even kill them in an instant and make them die without a burial. Such a powerful existence had actually encountered a tribulation. If they couldn't overcome it, there was naturally nothing to say. But if they did, what kind of benefits would they obtain? What level would their strength increase to? This was something that they were very curious about. They were curious about these third-grade supreme emperors and their actions. Luo Fan wasn't paying any attention to them right now. At this moment, his entire mind was immersed in the tribulation that was about to descend upon him. This tribulation was extremely powerful and terrifying. The moment it descended, the entire space-time was completely sealed. Everything in this space-time had been changed by the power of the tribulation, turning into an incomparably sturdy and powerful cage. Luo Fan was completely imprisoned within it, even though he was the creator of this world. Even though he was the creator of this world, he couldn't leave this space-time with his own authority. Even with his current powerful might, he couldn't distort anything in this space-time. He couldn't even cause any changes to the space-time, let alone break through it. And this was just the beginning. After the power of the tribulation had completely changed this space-time, it began to descend from the state of chaos without any scruples, constantly filling this space-time. It caused the space-time to undergo all sorts of changes that exceeded his imagination, gradually turning it into a state that he couldn't understand at all. It looked extremely gorgeous and fantastical, but at the same time, it also made him feel extremely dangerous. It was as if he would be completely destroyed by this gorgeous and fantastical scene in the next moment. Even the traces of his existence were completely erased. This state lasted for a few breaths. Then, thump, 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 thump. A sound that sounded like a heartbeat filled his ears from small to loud. Hearing this sound, Luo Fan's heart was extremely vigilant. After all, this was a sound born from the tribulation. It might contain enough power to destroy him. If he wasn't careful, he might just die in an instant because of this. However, no matter what method he used, whether it was to block his ears, his heart, his senses, or everything else, he couldn't stop this sound from entering his heart. It was impossible for him to isolate the thumping sounds that sounded like a heartbeat. It was as if this sound itself was ringing out from the depths of his life source. In the face of this change, Luo Fan's expression became extremely ugly. Just then, his little doppelganger began to tremble violently. Its entire body began to rapidly stretch and shrink, as if it had really turned into a heart. The thumping sound became louder and louder, and the penetrative power became stronger and stronger. There was even an indescribable power contained within it. Under this kind of power, he felt his soul begin to tremble. Then there was a soft pop. His little doppelganger collapsed with a loud bang. All the traces of death and rebirth that existed on it were released without reservation at this moment, and began to collide with all sorts of fantastical and gorgeous lights around it, causing these lights to undergo all sorts of incredible changes. In an instant, all sorts of indescribable power fused with these traces, causing them to disappear in the blink of an eye. The moment the traces disappeared, the thumping sound began to change. At this moment, his life source suddenly encountered an indescribable impact. Luo Fan's life source had already transformed into the materialization of his worldview. Now that it was suffering this impact, his entire worldview suddenly began to fall into chaos. Everything in the materialized world began to distort and deform, and a vague sense of destruction began to appear in this world. SH*T. At this moment, this was the only thought in Luo Fan's mind. Thump, 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 thump. The rumbling sounds shook the life essence, and each impact brought shocking chaos to the place. Things that shouldn't have been able to appear here were born. Chapter 1765. This change quickly broke through his soul, his sea of consciousness, and his body. In a trance, all that was left of him was the world of the origin of life, which was becoming more and more complicated and turbid at the same time. In this space-time, aside from the beautiful and illusory colors created by the tribulations, there was only this world and the innate indestructible spirit light that had turned into a ball. At this moment, Luo Fan had completely lost his sense of the outside world. His soul seemed to have been directly pulled into the origin of life and turned into an extremely lowly existence in that world. He began to struggle to survive in that world. Everything that existed in the surrounding space-time was frantically poured into that space-time and fused with everything inside. Gradually, that space-time became more and more complicated and unbelievable. This tribulation had long surpassed the heavenly tribulation, earthly tribulation, and human tribulation that ordinary cultivators encountered. Instead, it had reached another mysterious and indescribable level. In this tribulation, Luo Fan had completely forgotten about everything. Only his purest thoughts were left to accept the test. All his cultivation achievements, all his power, and all his means were useless at this moment. All he could rely on was his thoughts and the little bit of fundamental willpower that he had condensed in his lifetime of cultivation. At this moment, Luo Fan felt like he had become an extremely lowly, ordinary creature without any power. He had even lost his ability to think, let alone his memories. There was only one thought in his mind, or rather, it was an instinct: survival. This world that was the materialization of his worldview, which was his origin of life, was even more complicated than the real world. All the changes in it were more complicated than any world he had ever seen. It was even more difficult to distinguish. In this place, what Luo Fan first turned into was a floating monster that had no ability to think at all. This kind of lowly creature that was born and died at night struggled to absorb all the nutrients that he needed to survive in the ocean. He was extremely lowly in the ocean. At this moment, he didn't even have the ability to think. One day later, he died. He reincarnated again and turned into another creature. At this moment, he had turned into a fish, an extremely lowly and primitive fish. This fish also doesn't have the ability to think, but its instinct is much more complex than that of the floating monster. It's much easier to survive than the floating monster. In the end, it lives much longer than the floating monster. But in a short span of a month, this fish had already experienced countless trials and tribulations and died a violent death, swallowed by another fish. Then, Luo Fan reincarnated again and turned into an even more powerful fish. He also began to struggle to survive. To Luo Fan, this world was like the most sorrowful hell. Here, he was constantly reincarnated into a lowly creature, constantly encountering all sorts of misfortune. Normally speaking, an ordinary creature would only experience such misfortune once or twice in their lifetime. It was an incomparably bitter struggle to survive. Just like that, time passed slowly. 1,000,000 years passed in the blink of an eye. In this 1,000,000 years, Luo Fan reincarnated more than a dozen times almost every year. One year, he directly reincarnated hundreds of times. And every time, he almost experienced all the suffering that that creature could experience and all the misfortune that that creature could encounter. However, no matter what creature he reincarnated into, regardless of whether the creature had the ability to think or move, it would do everything it could to survive. It would do everything it could to make use of everything around it so that it could live longer. Compared to his own kind, he was many times stronger. It can be said that every time he reincarnated, he could be said to be the one who lived the longest and the best life among all his kind. Although from an absolute point of view, it was still extremely bad. But one had to admit that his will was strong. In 1,000,000 years of reincarnation, every time Luo Fan wanted to survive, he had to use all his strength. Cultivation was even more out of the question. It was also because of this that he had never been able to awaken a single bit of his memory. To him, he was the most ordinary and lowly person in this world. Every time he was born, he had no memory of his previous life and could only obtain the instincts of this creature. However, every time before he died, he faintly felt a trace of abnormality. This abnormality told him that he should not die like this, that his life should not be so lowly, and that his pursuit should not be so short-sighted. Unfortunately, this abnormality could only occur at the last moment before death. Moreover, the lowly the life he reincarnated into, the shorter the time for this abnormality to occur, and the more blurred the thoughts brought about by this abnormality. Until one day, after 1,000,000 years, Luo Fan finally reincarnated into a mammal called an ape. This ape, on a mountain, suffered from the almost undisguised malice of this world. When it landed on a tree, its branches would break. When it stood on the ground would crack. When it jumped between trees, strong winds would blow. When it wanted to find food, it would find poisonous fruits. When it rested, it would definitely be disturbed and attacked by wild beasts. When it went to the toilet, poisonous insects would definitely drill out of the ground. However, under this malice that seemed like the whole world wanted to kill him, he lived better and better. The aura on his body became stronger and stronger. His originally hazy mind started to gradually become clear. Apart from his instincts, a little bit of thinking that was different from his instincts was gradually born. Who am I? This thought finally appeared in his mind, although it was not before he died. The appearance of this thought was like the first flash of lightning in the hazy world. In an instant, the first light gradually appeared in his murky eyes. This light was the light of wisdom. It was born. This meant that he was no longer the same as the original ape. This meant that he had already taken the first step to transcend fate. At this moment, lightning flashed and thunder roared in the sky. The entire earth started to shake violently. It was as if the world was starting to get angry, an indescribable disgust. This was born in the ape's mind at this moment. This kind of disgust had never appeared in this ape before. Similarly, this also meant that he was already different from ordinary apes. At this moment, a bolt of lightning descended from the sky and struck the tree he was on. This kind of experience was too common for this ape. Since he was born, as long as there was a thunderstorm, the place where he was would definitely be struck by lightning. Therefore, at this moment, he did not hesitate at all and stretched out his body. As he stretched his body, he left his original spot easily and smoothly. He directly flew out of that tree and jumped over another one. Bang! Amidst a loud explosion, the tree he was originally on suddenly burst into flames. The fire started to spread rapidly in all directions, igniting more and more trees in the surroundings. Ow! This ape roared to the sky. He quickly jumped into the distance. When the light of wisdom appeared in his eyes, he felt that his thoughts had become clearer. Everything in the surroundings became less and less secret to him. He didn't even need to really perfect his thinking to be able to instinctively control all kinds of things that he couldn't control before. How can I jump faster? How to jump further? How to make use of the surrounding air? How to make use of the surrounding energy, etc. All of these instinctively appeared in his mind. This allowed him to easily escape even if the entire forest had been set on fire. Even if more and more ferocious beasts attacked him. Even if there were traps at his landing spots. Even if the lightning kept chasing him like rain, this rain lasted for a few days and nights. After a few days and nights, this ape finally stepped out of the forest and saw the vast world for the first time. It was a boundless grassland, and the endless life on the grassland. Endless danger. How? This ape roared to the sky again. As he roared, he instinctively understood how to store power in his body. This was the beginning of cultivation. When he absorbed the first wisp of power into his body, it was as if he had split open layers of dense fog. In his heart, a strange thought came to him. This world is fake. When this thought appeared in his mind, 2 rays of light suddenly shot out from his eyes. There seemed to be a lot of information and ideas in his mind that were colliding wildly, trying to break through that incomparably sturdy defense and descend upon this world once again. However, at this moment, the sky shattered. The sky and the grassland were pressed down by a huge claw. Everything collapsed in an instant, along with this ape. They all disappeared into nothingness at this moment. This ape erupted with an indescribable obsession. Finally, a bit of information rushed out from the depths of his mind. I am Luo Fan. In an instant, he found out his name. However, he only knew his name. After obtaining this name, he fell into darkness, and everything turned into nothingness. His essence was taken out and thrown into a new cycle of reincarnation. In the end, he stepped into an unknown place, and once again transformed into another kind of living being. This time, he turned into a ferocious tiger. The place where this ferocious tiger appeared was naturally not the grassland that had collapsed and been destroyed. This ferocious tiger was in a forest. The moment this ferocious tiger was born, his mother was already unhappy with him. She opened her mouth and was about to bite him and take his life. At this moment, the ferocious tiger that had just been born roared at the sky and rolled in an extremely strange manner. Dodging the tigress bite, he went straight to her throat and bit down. He bit the tigress /s throat. This ferocious tiger that had just been born did not even have teeth, and its strength was even weaker. However, at this time, he used almost all his strength and broke his gums. He used his bones to forcefully open a big hole in the tigress /s throat. As blood gushed out wildly, he began to quickly devour the blood as if he was drinking breast milk. The tigress struggled frantically. She kept rolling and smashing the little tiger. Unfortunately, the little tiger did not move at all. No matter what the tigress did, it only kept devouring the blood. Even if its bones were broken, it did not let go at all. In the end, a few minutes later, the tigress finally collapsed to the ground powerlessly, and her eyes gradually lost their vitality. More than 2 hours passed. The little tiger finally opened its mouth and roared hoarsely at the sky. There was an indescribable light in its eyes. It seemed to be sober. It seemed to be stubbornness, ruthlessness, and confusion. Luo Fan. Such a name suddenly appeared in his heart. This name seemed to have boundless power, directly suppressing all other distracting thoughts, the violence in his heart, and his confusion, causing him to suddenly fall into a state of absolute sobriety. With this sobriety, he instinctively saw the energy around him. Instinctively, he began to slowly absorb this energy into his body. As the energy continued to pour in, the injuries on his body began to slowly recover. If this continued, it could be imagined that he would be able to fully recover from his injuries very soon. In the end, he might even obtain supreme power, transcend the body of the ferocious tiger, and turn into a monster. He would continue to improve and finally retrieve all his memories. However, it was obvious that this world would not let him go so smoothly. At this moment, a violent storm suddenly appeared, and the mountain began to shake violently. Immediately after, rocks began to shatter at the foot of the mountain, and the entire mountain began to gradually collapse. Although this was the first time this ferocious tiger had encountered such a thing, he seemed to be instinctively familiar with this situation. At this time, he stopped the process of absorbing energy without any hesitation, dragged his broken body, and quickly rushed out of the cave. In the end, before the mountain completely collapsed, he rushed out of the cave and continuously jumped under the collapsed rocks with great difficulty, dodging. In the end, he paid the price of half of his body being crushed and escaped with great difficulty. After escaping, the ferocious tiger roared at the sky, his voice full of resentment and unwillingness. At this moment, a bolt of lightning descended from the sky and brazenly struck his body, directly turning him into charcoal, with no possibility of recovery. Luo Fan once again fell into another cycle and began another reincarnation. Just like this, in the next thousands of years, Luo Fan fell into death after death and reincarnation after reincarnation. It seemed that because he had understood his own name and understood the existence of the energy around him, he had triggered an even more violent reaction in this world. Therefore, every time he died and was reborn, the misfortune he suffered was thousands of times worse than before. In the past, he could still live for 1 or 2 years, but in these thousands of years, the longest time he lived through reincarnation was 3 days. On this third day, when he slightly condensed a bit of power in his body and was about to awaken more memories, the sky once again descended with a claw, completely erasing the world he was in, along with himself. In other words, in these thousands of years, the number of times he had reincarnated would probably be counted in billions. After so many reincarnations, although Luo Fan felt as if he was in the deepest depths of hell, his understanding of himself and the depths of his heart became clearer and clearer. The will in his heart also became firmer and firmer. Now, he could almost perfectly preserve the many memories of his previous reincarnation. However, with so many reincarnations, he had at most reincarnated into a mammal. Yet, he had never been able to reincarnate into a human. Several times, he had even directly reincarnated into a bacterium. This almost made him wonder if there were no longer any humans in this world. Until this time, he did not know how many times he had reincarnated in these thousands of years. Human. When he woke up, this word suddenly appeared in Luo Fan's dazed heart. At this time, his thoughts had already become unprecedentedly clear. It was constantly brewing in the depths of his heart. At this time, the impact of the unceasing impact of those memories had become unprecedentedly strong. In fact, he even faintly felt that there was an inexplicable attraction force that was attracting those memories to surge out. It filled his heart and filled his memories and his body. It had already turned into the appearance of a human baby. Although, like before, he was also in the wilderness, in a place without any man-made traces. This incomparably familiar feeling told him that he had already become a human. With this understanding, his heart instinctively moved. Boundless power began to pour into his body in a frenzy. After a series of transformations, in an instant, it turned into a defensive barrier that appeared around his body. The defensive barrier itself did not use too much power, and it could not even compare to a casual attack from any living being that had become a cultivator. However, the defensive power of this barrier was indescribably strong. Even the immortal ascension tribulation of a cultivator could not break through the defense of this barrier and harm the baby inside. The reason for this was very simple. The structure of this defensive barrier was compatible with some kind of existence in this world. This kind of compatibility caused any impact on the barrier to naturally disperse to the rest of the world. Naturally, it would be transmitted into the world without harming anything within the barrier. At this moment, a bolt of lightning suddenly fell from the sky. It directly smashed into the defensive barrier. At this moment, a loud cracking sound rang out. The lightning was shattered in an instant. Countless fragments flew in all directions, making the place look incredibly beautiful. This lightning was just the beginning. Next, lightning bolts after lightning bolts descended from the sky and struck the defensive barrier. The intensity and strength of this lightning had already exceeded a certain limit. Normally, even a mountain would be completely shattered in the blink of an eye. However, at this moment, facing this defensive barrier that contained power that could be considered negligible, the lightning could do nothing. The bolts of lightning had no way to deal with it. The bolts of lightning smashed the barrier one after another. Not even the slightest vibration could be transmitted to the baby inside the barrier. The baby's expression became extremely relaxed at this moment, and he began to fall into a strange sleep. He looked so adorable, yet so strange at the same time. The barrier could protect the baby, but it could not protect the surroundings. This area began to rapidly collapse under the lightning, and countless cracks began to spread from the cracks in all directions. Gradually, fiery red and scorching lava surged out of the cracks and began to drown everything in the surroundings. The defensive barrier was naturally within it, and it was also a part of the matter that was submerged. However, even though the magma had drowned the defensive barrier, it was unable to break through it, nor was it able to harm anything within the barrier. The defensive shield was floating in the magma like a submarine in the depths of the ocean. At this moment, a huge beast claw rapidly pressed down on this position in the sky. Boom! With an earth-shattering roar, the entire sky split apart, and a huge crack appeared on the ground. Everything in this crack turned into nothingness. Only the barrier remained there, without any damage, and the sleeping baby could still be seen. The beast claw's futile change seemed to have aroused the wrath of heaven and earth. At this moment, the sky began to shake extremely violently. Everything behind the beast claw finally began to reveal itself for the first time. This was a monster. It was unknown what kind of species it belonged to, and it was even indescribable with words. It seemed to be a mixture of countless species, and it looked extremely strange and terrifying. Chapter 1766. This monster was obviously the one that had revealed its claws countless times to completely destroy Luo Fan and everything around him. This monster was so powerful that the aura it revealed almost caused the entire world to shake violently. Below, Luo Fan, who was within the range of the defensive shield, felt his entire body tremble slightly. It was as if his life was no longer in his control at this moment, but was in the hands of an existence that was billions of times stronger than him. I have to hurry. A thought emerged in his mind. In this indescribable sense of crisis, his potential burst out. His potential was unleashed. The memories that had already been surging in the depths of his heart had finally broken through his limits. Endless light and shadows, endless information, and endless memories completely drowned his mind at this moment. At this moment, his body exploded with a loud bang. However, he could not withstand the impact of these memories at all. The moment the memories exploded, he had already completely exploded. However, even though his body had exploded, the defensive barrier still remained. It even began to strengthen itself to an extreme extent, frantically absorbing the endless energy around it to continuously increase its strength. At Luo Fan's level, his memories themselves had endless incredible power. Although he only had memories now, with his own strength, he could already do everything that an ordinary false saint could do. If not for this, his body would not have been unable to withstand the impact of these memories. So that's how it is? I finally understand. Such a voice kept coming from the memory. Immediately afterward, these memories began to condense rapidly, and in the blink of an eye, they had already condensed into the figure of a young man. This young man's figure. Obviously, it was Luo Fan's figure. This was not a real body. It was just a simple, condensed body of memories. However, just the strength of this condensed body of memories alone. In fact, it was already comparable to a supreme emperor. In addition to the endless principles contained in these memories, the power that it could exert had even reached the level of a second-grade supreme emperor. This was much stronger than when they had been separated. Having advanced to this level, the surrounding defensive barrier was naturally no longer necessary for it to exist. With a light wave, the barrier completely disappeared. Luo Fan's memories came directly to the outside world, and he was directly facing the void at this moment. The moment it appeared, it had already shaken the entire world and space. The monster let out an incomparably strange roar. Then, its countless claws blotted out the sky and the earth as they blasted towards Luo Fan. This attack contained enough power to destroy the heavens and the earth. It completely shattered time and space, forming a strange mist that accompanied these beast claws and continued to fall towards Luo Fan. Facing the countless beast claws and the space-time mist wrapped around the beast claws, Lin Fan's eyes widened. Luo Fan just smiled coldly. After he recovered his memories, he recalled the countless reincarnations and deaths. Countless misfortunes had piled up in his heart, giving rise to an indescribable feeling of vexation in his heart. If he didn't vent this frustration, he even wondered if he would go crazy because of it. So what if it's a tribulation? Can a tribulation toy with me like this? Such anger surged in his heart. Along with this emotion, he raised his hand and clapped. In an instant, countless light shadows erupted from his hand, like a huge world, and directly engulfed the countless beast claws. These silhouettes were so powerful, so unfathomable, that they exploded. They completely devoured the endless space-time mist. All the power was concentrated in the beast claws and exploded. In an instant, the beast claws were completely shattered. The light shadows didn't stop at this moment. Instead, they continued to surge upwards, engulfing the monster. In the blink of an eye, the monster was completely engulfed. The monster was so powerful that it shook the heavens and the earth, almost causing the entire world to collapse under its pressure. However, In the face of this light shadow, in the face of Luo Fan's attack, it seemed so powerless. It could be said that without any ability to resist, it had already melted in the light shadow and gradually collapsed. In the blink of an eye, it had already disappeared without a trace, as if it had never existed. "Break!" Luo Fan roared. His power was stimulated, and the light shadow shot straight into the sky, rushing towards the place where the monster had come from. It broke through the space-time, causing countless densely packed cracks to appear and eventually turned into countless tiny fragments. In the end, all the light shadows rushed into it, directly revealing a boundless, gorgeous, and illusory light shadow. Puffed! Amidst the earth-shattering explosion, the light shadows produced shocking chaos. Indescribable power erupted between the light shadows released by Luo Fan, and finally, they completely collapsed. Because of this, Luo Fan's surroundings fell into a clear state. The space-time that was originally destroyed in the surroundings began to recover quickly under some inexplicable law. In just a few breaths, everything around him had been completely restored to the appearance when Luo Fan first appeared. It still looked like the wilderness. Luo Fan's memory unit floated above the void, raised his eyes, and looked around. He instantly understood what was going on in this world. "I can't believe my worldview has turned into something like this," he muttered with a frown on his face. This world was a world that was materialized from his worldview of laws. Originally, everything in this world should follow the worldview of laws, and it should completely correspond to all his understanding of the worldview of laws. But now, this world was already many times more complicated than his worldview of laws. Among them, only insignificant things were left that corresponded to his worldview of laws, perhaps even less than a billionth of it. Apart from the worldview of laws, everything else was the product of all kinds of specious worldviews. Among them, some seemed to be an extension and transformation of the worldview of laws, while some seemed to have nothing to do with the worldview of laws at all, and might even be the complete opposite of the worldview of laws, such things. If it was under normal circumstances, Luo Fan absolutely wouldn't have any thoughts of keeping it. But, obviously, at this time, he obviously couldn't abandon it, because this was the source of his life force. If he abandoned his life source, would he still be alive? In other words, at this moment, Luo Fan only had one choice, and that was to clean up this world, make it pure again. That was the only way. Only then would he be able to retrieve his own life essence and escape this calamity for this world. The current Luo Fan was like a monster that didn't fit in. The entire world was full of malice against him. All the rules and laws in the world were rejecting him and targeting him. If it wasn't for the fact that he was powerful enough, countless attacks would have landed on his body just by standing there. However, even though he was already so strong, this world was still brewing a terrifying attack at this time. It was ready to pounce on him at any time. In his heart, he could clearly sense that danger was constantly approaching him. Regarding this, at first, he was a little puzzled, but he quickly reacted. He was in the midst of that calamity. Since he was in the midst of a calamity, it couldn't be smooth sailing. Everything in the outside world could turn into an attack against him. Although this kind of attack was so strange to him, he had never experienced this kind of calamity before. However, a calamity was a calamity. At this moment, the laws around him slightly condensed. They began to quickly condense towards him, and in the process, they began to quickly ignite. They formed an indescribable flame that constantly burned his body. This kind of flame was so incredible. Its level was so high that it was countless times higher than that of the Supreme Emperor's. In the face of this flame, Luo Fan was immediately ignited. Boundless heat continuously poured into his body from the flames. His memory started to distort during this process, as if it was being incinerated. Facing such a change, Luo Fan's expression turned solemn. He snorted coldly. His memories began to tremble, and an increasingly powerful might was released from them. This power contained a kind of innate indestructibility. After it appeared, although the flames continued to burn, They couldn't shake it in the slightest. In the end, this power swept through his body and directly extinguished the flames. However, this power still didn't stop. Instead, it continued to spread out, directly sweeping through the changing laws in the surroundings, causing the surrounding laws to collapse in an instant. However, after this collapse, all kinds of laws in this world began to continuously condense towards this place. In the blink of an eye, the laws lost here were already completely replenished. The speed of this process was so fast that it exceeded anyone's imagination. One had to know that the previous layer of laws that had collapsed probably covered a range of hundreds of millions of light years. This was an area that even light would need hundreds of millions of years to cover, but the replenishment of the layer of laws was completed in just a few breaths. Where is the source? At this moment, Luo Fan released his perception without reservation, sensing everything in this world in great detail. After all, this world was the origin of his life. Although it had become countless times more chaotic and turbid, it still contained his worldview. As such, he still had a great deal of control over this world. At this moment, he instantly grasped that part of the worldview that completely belonged to him. As he grasped this part of the worldview, his memory suddenly collapsed and began to rapidly penetrate the space-time of this world, penetrate the layer of laws, penetrate the unseen world, and penetrate the great Tao. In the end, his memories had completely fused with his worldview, becoming a part of this world. The moment his memories completely fused with all of this, he felt a chill run down his spine. He felt an indescribable pressure being released from this world, crushing him crazily. It impacted his worldview. This kind of crushing, this kind of impact was so powerful and terrifying. It made him feel like he had become a mortal thrown into a stormy sea. The endless terrifying impact made him feel like he was about to be completely crushed in the next moment. His will, his memory, everything about him was about to be completely eliminated in the next moment. At this moment, obviously, he could only persevere with great difficulty. Regardless of the impact around him, he tried his best to keep himself from shattering, not collapsing, and tried his best to stabilize his existence during this process. In this process, he completely forgot everything in the outside world, and even forgot where he was. He only knew that he was constantly resisting wave after wave of impact, crushing again and again. The impact became stronger and stronger, more and more terrifying, and it felt like he was about to capsize. The feeling of destruction naturally became stronger and stronger. However, Luo Fan was Luo Fan after all. In the face of this absolute disadvantage, his spirit became more and more resolute. In that power, he was incomparably firm in his mind. In the end, although the impact was getting stronger and more terrifying, he felt that his footing was getting more and more stable. Finally, after an unknown period of time, his mind suddenly became clear, and he felt that he had finally completely stabilized his mind. Although the impact from the outside world was still so terrifying and was still constantly increasing, he felt like it was just a gentle breeze. There was no longer that feeling of capsizing. 100 million years. The moment he came back to his senses, Luo Fan knew how long had passed. In the process of resisting with great difficulty, in the blink of an eye, 100 million years had passed. Even if it was Luo Fan, he still couldn't ignore it. And the benefits of this 100 million years of hard work were quite obvious. At the very least, at this time, his mind was already firm enough to ignore all the impact around him. At the very least, his mind was already in a state where he could ignore all the impact around him at this time. Releasing his perception, he began to see his surroundings clearly amidst the boundless impact. At this time, he discovered that the worldview that belonged to him had been reunited. This gathered worldview formed a perfect whole, occupying the center of this world, forming a round, shining ball that rotated slightly, resisting the endless pressure of the surrounding world. Let me end this long tribulation. With this thought in mind, Luo Fan controlled this worldview with absolute will and began to slowly expand, absorbing the existences around him that were connected to the worldview, and completely rejecting the existences that were completely unrelated or even completely opposite. Originally, he was quietly in the center, but he already had to bear indescribable pressure. Now that it was spreading outwards, the pressure was naturally more than 10 times stronger than before. Fortunately, after the previous 100 million years of tempering, his will had now reached a state where it was almost eternally immovable. In the face of this pressure, his will didn't waver in the slightest, and the way he pushed the worldview to expand also didn't change. It was still moving forward at an absolute uniform speed. At this time, endless power continuously descended from the state of chaos around the space-time, continuously pouring into the space-time formed by Luo Fan's life source, constantly strengthening the space-time. Not only did it resist the expansion of the worldview, but it also impacted and crushed it. So that's how it is. At this time, this was the only thought that kept appearing in Luo Fan's mind. Every time he took a step forward in his worldview, he felt that his worldview of laws had been expanded and perfected, and he had unknowingly comprehended some principles that he didn't know before. This feeling of gaining something with every step was simply wonderful for him. In a trance, he even felt that his willpower seemed to have become even stronger. It was as if every step he took to expand his willpower was strengthening and expanding his willpower. He gradually came to an understanding of the reason for this tribulation. This tribulation was a sign that his worldview of laws had grown to a certain limit. In the state of chaos, it already possessed a part of the characteristics of a perfect world, which then caused this tribulation to descend. So that's how it is. Unknowingly, I've already grown to this point. When he understood this, Luo Fan's heart was filled with indescribable joy. This joy became more and more intense, and in the end, it finally turned into uncontrollable excitement. He couldn't help but laugh out loud. So that's how it is. So that's how it is. I've finally grasped the doorknob of the true divine door. As he laughed, this was the thought that appeared in his mind. In the state of chaos, it possessed a part of the characteristics of a perfect world, and this kind of tribulation that was similar to the great divine tribulation descended, but it also changed according to his specific situation. This meant that he would be like a true perfect world, and he would receive tribulation after tribulation. In this way, he would also be like a true perfect world. After passing through 9 tribulations, he would obtain a strong breakthrough, and from then on, there would be no tribulations or immeasurable tribulations. Eternal indestructibility, and this was obviously becoming a true divine. In other words, for the current Luo Fan, as long as he could pass through the 9 tribulations from the state of chaos that would appear in the following years, he would truly break through his limits and become truly eternal and indestructible. He would be able to travel freely in the state of chaos and become a true divine. And this process was just like how a perfect world couldn't avoid the great divine tribulation. It was unavoidable and unavoidable. He either had to pass through these 9 tribulations, become a true divine, or he would directly perish in the tribulations, and his body and Tao would disappear. His soul would be destroyed, and he would never be able to reincarnate. Apart from this, there was no third possibility. Each of the 9 tribulations would definitely be extremely difficult, and there would definitely be a slim chance of survival. If he wanted to truly become a true divine, it would definitely be extremely difficult. But after all, he had already set foot on the path to heaven. From now on, all he needed to do was to work hard to think of a way to resist these tribulations. He no longer needed to be like other cultivators, who could only search around with great difficulty, constantly experiment, and try to find a trace of opportunity to become a true divine. This was already many times stronger than before. Understanding this, it was no wonder that Luo Fan showed such excitement at this time. In this excitement, he felt that the speed at which the world of laws expanded had become faster and faster. The way in which the world of laws grew also became smoother and smoother. It was everything in the world that was extended from the world of laws. However, it only occupied a small part of it. Although this kind of expansion absorbed the various things that were extended from the world of laws, it was still far from being able to compare to the various things that were rejected. Therefore, in the part of the world that was outside the world of laws, the things that were mutually exclusive to the world of laws became more and more numerous, and they were piled up closer and closer. This made it more and more difficult to expand the world of laws. In the end, at a certain moment, outside of the world of laws, because many things were rejected, an unknown number of completely chaotic worldviews were suddenly born. These worldviews were like a hodgepodge. Although they had taken shape, they were not unified at all. There were already all kinds of conflicts within them, and all kinds of unimaginable destructive power erupted. It was impossible to truly condense all the power into one. However, even so, the world of laws had already taken shape, and its power was much stronger than the original state where all kinds of things were simply piled up. At this time, Luo Fan felt that the expansion of his world of laws had finally stopped. He had a feeling that his life source had been completely divided. All kinds of chaotic worldviews seemed to have the same memories as him, but followed a completely different worldview. They occupied a part of his life source, and began to compete with his world of laws for the dominance of this life source. They were fighting over which of these worldviews would replace the position of this world of laws and become Luo Fan's true worldview. There's actually such a change. Sure enough, this kind of tribulation corresponding to the great tribulation of the world isn't so easy to overcome. This was the only thought that flashed through Luo Fan's mind at this time. But he wasn't the least bit discouraged or resentful. Chapter 1767. In the face of this change in the origin of life, Luo Fan could only devote all his attention to the battle with the other worldviews that had been separated from the origin of life. There was no buffer or concealment in this kind of battle. His worldview was suffering from the huge conflict of the various chaotic worldviews around him. In this conflict, every point of his worldview was being confused, impacted, and became chaotic. In order to resist the conflict of the many worldviews, he had to firmly hold on to his ideas and his understanding of the world. And this was obviously the most difficult part of this tribulation. The increasing number of chaotic worldviews in the surroundings constantly impacted and crushed his worldview, constantly stripping away some ideas from his worldview and constantly integrating some of their own chaotic ideas into Luo Fan's worldview. They wanted to turn Luo Fan's worldview back into the state of absolute chaos at the very beginning. In this state, Luo Fan's mind became more and more confused. Vaguely, the various memories that he had just obtained showed signs of being deprived. In the face of such an earth-shattering change, he guarded his mind tightly, guarding the core of his worldview. The core of this worldview was that the world, the universe, the state of chaos, and even the state before the state of chaos were all composed of laws. Apart from this true core, everything else, no matter how complicated, mysterious, or profound, could be developed from this core. When he truly guarded this core, it was like there was an additional stabilizing force in his heart. No matter how many worldviews impacted and crushed, no matter how much they assimilated and confused, he could find his fulcrum. And as long as he found this fulcrum, no matter how the outside world changed, no matter what his worldview changed, he even had the chance to recover it. In this state, Luo Fan fell into a state of being half awake and half confused. His spirit seemed to have suffered countless blows as he floated in an incomparably chaotic ocean. But every time the ocean was about to drown him and completely break him apart, he would be able to grab onto an incomparably stable and powerful pillar in the ocean. With this change, he felt that his mind was becoming purer and purer. His understanding of the worldview of laws was becoming deeper and deeper. After an unknown period of time, the surrounding ocean gradually calmed down. His mind gradually regained its clarity. Finally, at a certain moment, like a chick that had finally broken out of its eggshell and revealed its head, an unprecedented sense of ease and stability filled his heart. At this moment, he discovered that his worldview had shrunk to about half of its original size. However, after the worldview was shrunk, it revealed a crystal-clear luster. It was fundamentally different from the chaotic worldview that had multiplied by an unknown number of times. How much time has passed? Luo Fan thought to himself. This idea. Naturally, he received the feedback of heaven and earth, and instantly knew how much time had passed. 30 million years. Understanding this, he couldn't help but rejoice and feel helpless. This was time. It was not too long, but it was not too short either. Compared to the previous 100 million years, the difference was more than half. But compared to the normal 3 to 5 days of tribulation, it was already countless times longer. However, at this time, he could already see the hope of surviving the tribulation. Now, I can be considered to have truly obtained the benefits of this tribulation. With a slight jolt in his heart, such a thought flashed through his mind. As he thought of this, his worldview trembled slightly. Shockwaves began to appear one after another, constantly rushing out in all directions. They constantly impacted the chaotic worldview around him, causing more and more cracks to appear on those worldviews. More and more fragments were produced. Following that, the worldview of laws began to quickly crush those fragments, absorbing the various transformations that could conform to the worldview of laws, crushing those that couldn't be transformed no matter what, and turning them into nothingness. Just like this, the fluctuations never stopped, and the selection and transformation also never stopped. All sorts of things continued as time passed. The surrounding worldview shattered more and more, and the degree of shattering became deeper and deeper. In the end, at a certain moment, amidst an inexplicable fluctuation, all the worldviews collapsed with a loud bang, transforming into endless fragments that started to split apart madly. They were rapidly picked out, either converted into the worldview or turned into nothingness, completely vanishing without a trace. This process lasted for an unknown period of time before it stopped. At this time, Luo Fan's life origin was only left with his worldview of laws. Moreover, compared to before, apart from the sparkling and translucent luster, there was also a faint feeling of perfection. The aura that the world that it had materialized exuded also had traces of the perfect world. At this moment, outside of the origin of life, there were still endless beautiful and mysterious colors. At this moment, they were still attacking Luo Fan's life origin, trying their best to break through it. They wanted to pour the mysterious existences contained in the colors into his life origin. In the face of this change, the life origin showed a completely different state from before. The life origin slightly shrank, and all kinds of mysterious existences began to appear around it. In the end, under some mysterious change that couldn't be described with words, Luo Fan reappeared in this space-time. After reappearing, Luo Fan quietly floated in the midst of the gorgeous colors. Hovering there, he raised his hand and blasted out a punch in the void. The space-time collapsed in an instant. All the power, colors, and mysterious existences in this space-time completely collapsed along with the collapse of this space-time. Everything disappeared. Suddenly, a strange light descended from the chaotic state and enveloped Luo Fan's body. In an instant, all kinds of mysterious comprehensions appeared. They appeared out of thin air in his heart. Countless information, light, and shadows. They quickly integrated into his memory and began to constantly stimulate his worldview, causing his worldview to evolve further. The growth and perfection of the worldview could only be completed by the continuous growth of one's knowledge. In the past, Luo Fan used seclusion to achieve this step, but that was only because he had seen too much in the past. There were other things that he hadn't seen, and he couldn't see them with his own eyes. Under such circumstances, the chaotic state took the initiative to integrate the countless information into his memory. This was like directly increasing his knowledge, and it naturally had an immediate effect on the growth and perfection of his worldview. This process lasted for an unknown period of time. At some point, Luo Fan slowly came back to his senses. With a thought, the entire world trembled slightly, as if some existence that couldn't be contained by this world was forcibly squeezed into this world. Faintly, the great Tao of this world began to produce some extremely subtle changes. This kind of change was so mysterious, so obscure. Even the supreme third-level emperors on this great Tao couldn't discover the root of this change. They could only feel that this great Tao, compared to before, it seemed to have become even more mysterious. It's indeed the right path. Such a thought flashed through Luo Fan's mind at this moment. At this moment, he already felt that the power of his divine ability had increased a lot compared to before. The world in front of him was originally perfect, but now there were countless omissions and countless places that could be modified. All of this clearly showed that compared to before, he was one step closer to becoming a true saint. His heart moved slightly. He casually made a grabbing motion, and the innate, inextinguishable spiritual light that he had ignored for hundreds of millions of years had already entered his body with a tremble. It was almost completely integrated with his body. At this moment, he already knew how much time had passed. During the time, he was undergoing the heavenly tribulation. Nearly 300 million years had already passed. Currently, there was only a short 600 million years left before the next great tribulation of the world, which was also the 8th great tribulation of the world. Let's put this aside first. With such a thought in mind, Luo Fan turned around and stepped into the innate, inextinguishable spiritual light, appearing near the air hostess. The moment he appeared, the air hostess, who had been looking forward to his appearance, discovered his arrival. She couldn't help but be overjoyed. She stopped what she was doing and directly appeared in front of Luo Fan. Luo Fan looked at the air hostess, who was still the same as before, with an inexplicable relaxed smile on his face in the innate, inextinguishable spiritual light. Luo Fan stayed for tens of millions of years. During these tens of millions of years, he didn't think much about the various things in the outside world. He just walked from world to world with the air hostess, leaving one legend after another in these worlds. Although all the worlds in the innate, inextinguishable spiritual light were quite mysterious, there weren't many secrets for Luo Fan, who was the owner of the innate, inextinguishable spiritual light. He had walked through many worlds, but it did not bring him much benefit. Instead, he just relaxed and completely stabilized his worldview, which had grown tremendously after transcending the tribulation. However, it was different for the air hostess. Although she had cultivated in the innate, inextinguishable spiritual light for more than 1 billion years, there were simply too many worlds in the innate, inextinguishable spiritual light, and the structure was really too chaotic. Therefore, she didn't gain much during these billions of years. Therefore, when Luo Fan accompanied her to walk between the many worlds, comprehending these worlds in an extremely relaxed manner, and enjoying these worlds, she unknowingly reorganized all the various comprehensions in the past, and her cultivation realm was unknowingly improved. Her worldview that completely belonged to her had also made great progress, although there was still a world of difference compared to Luo Fan's worldview, compared to her previous self. That improvement couldn't be ignored by anyone. After enjoying these tens of millions of years of relaxation, Luo Fan finally stepped out of the innate, inextinguishable spiritual light. Compared to before he entered the innate, inextinguishable spiritual light, he was much more relaxed now, much calmer. The various negative traces left in his heart by the previous hundreds of millions of years of tribulations had been completely eliminated by him. Now that he had completely calmed down, his feelings were quite different from before. In the past, when he sensed the chaotic state, he felt an indescribable danger. It was as if he would be completely destroyed if he came into contact with the chaotic state, and there was no possibility of him escaping successfully. But now, when he sensed the chaotic state again, he vaguely felt an inexplicable confidence. He was confident that as long as he didn't fully immerse himself in it, the chaotic state wouldn't be able to do anything to him. There was no reason for this confidence. However, it gave him an indescribable sense of security. Is this real, or just an illusion brought about by the sudden breakthrough? Such a thought flashed across Luo Fan's mind. Since he had such a thought, he naturally had to confirm it. With a thought, he reached his hand into the connate, inextinguishable spiritual light. With a grab, the seed of chaos fell into his hand. As soon as he reached out, the seed of chaos appeared in front of him. In other worlds, he naturally wouldn't dare to do this. Even if he wanted to test whether his confidence was an illusion, he could only hide inside the innate, inextinguishable spiritual light to test it. But this world was completely different from any other world in the past. The reason for that was because he was the one who had created this world, a world that belonged to him completely. In such a world, he was the most supreme existence. None of the living creatures here could resist him, and none could affect him. Even if there were any accidents, he only needed to think of a way to solve all of them. Under such circumstances, he could naturally do whatever he wanted in this world. With a slight thought, he grabbed the seed of chaos and took a light step forward. He had already arrived at the gap between this world and the chaotic state. Although this part of the world was connected to the Earth's universe, but that was only one side. The other side of this world was still connected to the true chaotic state. It was precisely because of this. It couldn't be easier to find a gap between this world and the chaotic state, especially for Luo Fan, who was the creator of this world. At this moment, in this gap, Luo Fan's heart moved, and he conveniently released the seed of chaos. After the seed of chaos appeared, it naturally stirred up the endless grayish existences in the surroundings, causing the grayish existences to surge slightly and vaguely form a strange vortex. This vortex grew bigger and more obvious. However, in the end, it formed a vacuum around the seed of chaos, completely isolating the seed of chaos from the gray existences around it. Looking at this scene, Luo Fan was secretly surprised, and he had a deeper understanding of the seed of chaos. However, he didn't need to care about this for the time being. At this moment, what was more important was to directly guide the chaotic state to test whether his previous confidence was an illusion or not. With a slight thought, Luo Fan conveniently poured a mysterious power into the seed of chaos. In an instant, the seed of chaos broke the barrier between the gap and the chaotic state. Traces of chaotic state were drawn out and wrapped around the seed of chaos. From this, it could be seen how much stronger Luo Fan had become compared to before. Now that he wanted to activate the seed of chaos and guide the chaotic state into the world, it was much easier than before. Looking at the chaotic state, the confidence in his heart grew stronger. With a slight thought, Luo Fan slowly stretched out his palm and slowly grasped the chaotic state in the surrounding chaotic state. Sizzle, sizzle, sizzle. A sound that sounded like concentrated sulfuric acid melting metal came from the place where his palm and the chaotic state came into contact. Amidst this sound, Luo Fan felt an incomparably heavy and painful feeling coming from his palm. Then his palm gradually melted like an ordinary person coming into contact with concentrated sulfuric acid. Seeing this scene, Luo Fan wasn't shocked, but happy instead. There was an indescribable joy in his eyes as he thought, as expected, my confidence is not an illusion. It's not an illusion. I can really touch the chaotic state now, and it won't be like before. As long as I touch any part of the chaotic state, I will need the innate, inextinguishable spiritual light to escape. With this thought in mind, his palm slowly left the chaotic state. As his palm left, the chaotic state returned to its original state. His palm also began to recover rapidly. In the blink of an eye, it had completely returned to its normal state. There wasn't any damage at all, as if it had never been injured in the first place. The scene just now looked tragic, and the palm was powerlessly melted in the chaotic state. If it was something else, anyone would think that he wouldn't be able to withstand that kind of existence at all. However, this was against the chaotic state after all. What was the chaotic state? Once it came into contact with the chaotic state, it would instantly destroy any existence that wasn't a true sage. Even traces of it would be completely erased. If Luo Fan touched this existence with his palm, then in the next moment, His palm would definitely be melted and assimilated by the chaotic state as if it didn't need to go through any time. Absorb. Even his memory of this palm would be completely erased in an instant, making him think that he had never touched this palm. How could there be such a situation where his palm kept melting? In particular, during the process of the palm melting, he didn't feel that his memory was being erased. His memory of this palm was still intact. Wasn't this enough to prove that he was able to withstand the chaotic state? As for the palm melting in the chaotic state, this only meant that his body's degree of refinement wasn't enough. With a slight thought, Luo Fan raised his hand and waved it. Waves of power turned into a palm in front of him and slowly reached for the chaotic seed. It grabbed at the chaotic state around the seed. This power was much stronger than his palm. Normally speaking, it should be able to withstand more pressure than the palm. However, it was obvious that the current situation wasn't normal. The moment the palm formed by power came into contact with the chaotic state, it seemed as if it didn't need to go through time to be assimilated. There was even an inexplicable erasure power that seeped into Luo Fan's mind out of thin air and began to search for his memory of this power palm in an attempt to erase it. Sensing this change, how could Luo Fan dare to be negligent? He hurriedly maintained his worldview and struggled to use the power of the worldview to protect his memory while enduring the continuous impact of the erasure power. At the same time, he quickly used his power to retract the power palm. However, when he finally retracted the power palm, he realized that the front half of the palm had completely disappeared. Even the fracture looked so natural, as if the palm had never grown a front half. Why is this happening? Luo Fan was puzzled. The power was extremely mysterious and seemed to have pushed his various comprehensions to the limit. Compared to his palm, its strength was more than 100 times stronger. However, his palm could resist the chaotic state. If he was ruthless, he could even grab the chaotic state. However, his palm that was formed by power couldn't withstand the chaotic state at all. The moment it came into contact with the chaotic state, it disappeared just like other things that weren't at the true sage level. Even the traces of its existence were erased. Luo Fan had all kinds of thoughts in his mind, and all kinds of lights were constantly flashing. Amidst this flash of inspiration, he came up with an idea, but he quickly rejected another one. In the end, after repeating this hundreds of times, his eyes lit up. I see. Now, he finally understood why his palm could withstand the primal chaos state, but couldn't withstand any more powerful force. The reason was very simple. It was because his palm had now perfectly integrated with his worldview. Although his palm was still made of flesh and blood, it had in fact become an extension of his worldview. Chapter 1768. Although the palm formed by the power was powerful, the laws of the world integrated into it was much lesser than his palm. After all, this energy was constantly flowing. It was constantly being produced, and it was constantly being consumed. Compared to the existence of a fixed body and the origin of life, it was more than 100 times more difficult to truly integrate the laws of the world into it and achieve perfect integration. Even for Luo Fan's current level, it was definitely not an easy task to achieve this step. It was precisely because of this difference that the power before the state of chaos was different from that of the hand, made of flesh and blood. For the boundless power of primal chaos, no matter how powerful one's power was, it was insignificant to it. Perhaps even a true saint couldn't resist it with power. Only by using the laws of the world to protect everything could one maintain one's complete existence in the chaos. After understanding this difference, Luo Fan had a complicated expression on his face. This discovery naturally meant that his comprehension of the worldview of laws had reached the threshold. Now, it was enough for his flesh and blood to withstand the state of chaos. But at the same time, it also showed the shortcomings of his laws of the world. If it was a truly perfect world, it would definitely be integrated into his power. In other words, his power would definitely be able to withstand the primal chaos state, just like his physical body. There would not be such an obvious difference like now. With a slight sigh, Luo Fan pointed at the chaos seed. As the seed of chaos trembled slightly, the chaotic state on it naturally collapsed, evolving into all kinds of incredible time, space, matter, and energy, and fused into the gray existence around it. In the blink of an eye, it disappeared without a trace. As the chaos completely disappeared, the chaos seed trembled and disappeared without a trace. However, it obviously didn't collapse completely. Instead, it merged into the surroundings and plunged into the innate, inextinguishable spiritual light. It returned to the original chaos door and continued to stay there quietly. After doing this, Luo Fan took a step forward and left the gap between heaven and earth and the chaos, returning to the normal space-time. Arriving here, Luo Fan's expression had completely restored its original calmness. At this moment, there were so many flaws in this world in his eyes. What he needed to do was naturally to fix this world according to these flaws. It caused the world to become more and more perfect. After all, allowing this world to pass through the eighth tribulation was quite beneficial to him as well. With a slight thought, an indescribable ripple spread out from his body. In the blink of an eye, it had already swept through every inch of space in the world, causing everything in the world to be enveloped by his ripple. At this moment, all the living beings in this world, from the ants crawling in the dust to the level 3 supreme emperors who were almost omnipotent, were all stunned. All of them felt a supreme existence that was billions of times greater than them casting its gaze on them. That unprecedented feeling made each and every one of them feel an indescribable reverence from the bottom of their hearts, this feeling of awe. It was unknown how many living beings involuntarily bowed in Luo Fan's direction, their expressions filled with trepidation. An indescribable pious intent quickly gathered in Luo Fan's direction, trying to burrow into his body. If this kind of pious intent was obtained by a cultivator who believed in the divine path, perhaps they would be able to surpass their limits in an instant and become a supreme sacred god. However, for Luo Fan, this was poison. Their existence would only disrupt his power and confuse his mind. At this moment, sensing the arrival of these powers, his heart moved. With a casual pat of his hand, the endless pious intent that had gathered in the surroundings completely collapsed. They all melted into the void and became the power of this world for heaven and earth. Any kind of power didn't matter. As long as they fused with it, it would be beneficial to them. Not to mention this kind of pious intent. Their fusion caused the world to grow in a subtle way. The tiny loopholes and flaws that Luo Fan had locked onto were actually unknowingly closed at this moment. Noticing this, Luo Fan didn't pay too much attention to it. At this moment, his heart moved slightly. An indescribably powerful manipulation force directly poured into this fluctuation and began to control everything in this world. This caused the time, space, laws, and even the great Tao to constantly squirm and change during this process. The unreasonable structure that he originally thought was broken, and a completely new structure that was subtly different from before was re-established. This kind of deep change in the world was an extremely obscure change to the living beings in this world. But at this moment, almost no living beings noticed the existence of this change. In the perception of all living beings, there was only the perception that the supreme existence was manipulating something and carrying out some changes. This process lasted for an unknown period of time. At first, the living beings could still feel the passage of time. But as time passed, and as Luo Fan continued to change, they gradually forgot about the passage of time and all the changes in the outside world. When they came back to their senses, they realized that the world didn't seem to have changed at all, but it also seemed like an earth-shattering change had taken place. This was especially true for the Supreme Emperor-level cultivators, who felt this change even more clearly. They felt that many of their previous understandings of heaven and earth had become wrong. Many divine abilities that they could cast in the past were greatly affected at this moment. Some couldn't be used, some had their power greatly reduced, and some even had their power greatly increased. What's going on? How could there be such a change in this world? One of the level 3 supreme sovereigns exclaimed. At this moment, this level 3 supreme emperor's body was a little blurry, and his aura was a little unstable. It fluctuated up and down, high and low, compared to the level 3 supreme emperors around him. Although there were some changes, the changes were much more obvious. In such a situation, it was obvious that he was affected by the change in heaven and earth countless times more than the other level 3 supreme emperors. This should be the Creator's change to this world. Another level 3 supreme emperor looked at the level 3 supreme emperor sympathetically. Hearing this, the supreme emperor who spoke first showed a look of panic and said, "Why did the Creator make such a change? Did I do something wrong? Is he going to punish me?" Fellow Taoist, you think too highly of yourself. At this moment, the female level 3 supreme emperor frowned. That's right. With the power of the Creator's divine ability, if he wants to punish you, he can just casually pinch you with a finger, and you'll probably never be able to reincarnate. Why would he go through such a big detour and change the world to punish you? Another level 3 supreme emperor said faintly. The onlooker sees the game more clearly than the onlooker. To that level 3 supreme emperor, he was undoubtedly the most important. He could even be called the center of this universe. And he even vaguely felt that this universe had appeared because of his birth. Under such circumstances, any changes that might affect him would naturally feel that these changes had appeared to affect him. Under such circumstances, he would naturally feel that these changes had appeared to affect him. Under such circumstances, he felt that these changes had appeared to affect him. It wasn't surprising that this level 3 supreme emperor would have such thoughts and come to such a realization. However, a level 3 supreme emperor was a level 3 supreme emperor after all. After being reminded by the other two, the cultivator quickly reacted, and a look of shame appeared on his face. At the same time, he began to carefully sense the changes that had happened to this world. Very quickly, his sober willpower allowed him to understand what had happened. This world is at least twice as strong as before, he murmured. His expression was filled with indescribable shock. This world was originally so perfect in his eyes, and he even felt that no one would be able to shake it in the slightest, and no one would be able to improve it in the slightest. But at this time, he didn't know what the Creator had done. This world had actually undergone such an earth-shattering improvement. What kind of incredible achievement was this? How incredible was the Creator's divine power to be able to achieve this? As he realized this, his aura began to weaken rapidly, but at the same time, it was also rapidly stabilizing. In the end, after weakening to the limit, he finally stabilized his aura at the level 3 Supreme Emperor level. He had finally stopped the greatest misfortune of falling in level. Seeing that he had finally stabilized his level, the other Supreme Emperors all revealed looks of joy. One by one, they congratulated one of the Supreme Emperors for finally stabilizing his level. At this time, that Supreme Emperor was also overjoyed. He said, "It's all thanks to you fellow Taoists for reminding me. If it weren't for you fellow Taoists, I'm afraid I wouldn't have known the true meaning of this world's changes until now. Who knows, I might really have fallen to the level of a level 2 Supreme Emperor." His words weren't polite at all. The higher one's cultivation realm increased, the greater the impact of a change in one's temperament on one's cultivation realm. Just now, this level 3 Supreme Emperor was in a state where he could either fall or not fall. And what affected this state was his thoughts, his temperament, and his willpower. If his willpower was in a negative state where he was being punished, this inclination would lean towards falling. But now that he was in a state where the world had become stronger and better, if he could endure it, he would be able to obtain a greater improvement. This inclination would naturally lean towards not falling. The other level 3 Supreme Emperors naturally wouldn't take credit. All of them were very polite as they congratulated that level 3 Supreme Emperor. Just as they were congratulating each other humbly, a door appeared in front of them out of thin air. The aura coming from this door was so vast, and its level was so high. It made them feel an indescribable sense of reverence from the bottom of their hearts. At this moment, they naturally understood what was going on. Where did this door come from, and why did it appear? Not daring to delay, they stepped through the door one by one. After passing through that long passageway, in the blink of an eye, they were already out of the unseen world. They appeared in the normal space and time. Greetings, Lord Creator. When they left the passageway and saw the scene outside, these level 3 Supreme Emperors didn't dare to delay. All of them bowed and greeted the figure. Naturally, it was Luo Fan. Seeing these level 3 Supreme Emperors bow respectfully in front of him, he said calmly, "No need for formalities. There are less than 300 million years left until the 8th great calamity of this world. Next, you guys are going to take action." Hearing this, the expressions of these level 3 Supreme Emperors changed slightly. "May I ask, Lord Creator, what is the probability of passing through the great calamity of this world?" The first level 3 Supreme Emperor asked carefully. "You guys have been cultivating well these past few years. Now, you can already increase the probability to 30%, Luo Fan said calmly. 30%. The level 3 Supreme Emperors seemed to have expected this, but at the same time, there was a hint of disappointment on their faces. After more than 1 billion years of hard work, increasing the probability from 5% to 30% was naturally within their expectations. However, just because it was within their expectations didn't mean that they were satisfied. After all, 30% wasn't even more than 50%. In other words, even if there was a 30% chance of passing through the great calamity of this world, there was still a 50% chance of not passing through the great calamity of this world. And this also meant that after 300 million years, there was a 50% chance that they would die and their souls would dissipate. Under such circumstances, it would be strange if they were satisfied. Luo Fan naturally understood their mentality. However, he couldn't be bothered to care too much about it. 30% chance. It didn't seem like much, but for this world, it was already far greater than he had expected. One had to know that normally, this world wouldn't even be able to pass through the 7th great calamity of this world. But now there was actually a 30% chance of passing through the 8th great calamity of this world. Such a high probability was enough to make criminals burn incense and pray to Buddha. These level 3 Supreme Emperors naturally wouldn't be discouraged just because the probability was less than 50% like ordinary people. However, they quickly gathered their focus and respectfully asked Luo Fan what they should do to strengthen the power of this world so that the probability of passing through the great calamity of this world would be greatly increased. Luo Fan had asked them to come because of this, so he naturally wouldn't hesitate at a time like this. He made the arrangements without hesitation. Under his arrangements, these level 3 Supreme Emperors went to different parts of the world and began to merge their own powers with the world to a certain extent. Gradually, a layer of indescribable defense was added to the world. Of course, there were only 7 level 3 Supreme Emperors after all. Although they were strong and powerful, there were too few of them. Even if they really succeeded, they would only be able to build an outline of this defense at most. After sending them away, Luo Fan began to summon the Supreme Emperors one after another. Like playing chess, he ordered them to go to one area after another to help build the defense. In the end, when all the Supreme Emperors had their tasks confirmed, they formed a complete outline of a strange state. At this time, they already had the foundation to complete it. Of course, it was only the foundation. To really build the entire defense, it would take an extremely long time. Based on preliminary calculations, it should take at least 200 million years. Moreover, such a defense was still not perfect. At that moment, Luo Fan once again summoned the false saints one by one and gave them tasks one by one. He asked them to help the Supreme Emperors, to fill in the positions that the Supreme Emperors couldn't reach, and to supplement the defense. With such an order, all the living beings above the false saints in this world already had their own tasks. And a few days had passed. Next, it's time to nurture more false saints. looking at the many living beings above the false saints taking their positions and starting to build the defense. This thought flashed through Luo Fan's mind. This defense was already the strongest defense that Luo Fan could think of for the living beings above the false saints to resist the eighth great calamity of the world. But it was absolutely impossible to survive the eighth great calamity of the world with just this kind of defense. Judging from a situation of the seventh great calamity of the world, the horror of the eighth great calamity of the world, it must be extremely terrifying. Even if it was him, if he didn't have the protection of the innate, indestructible spiritual light, he would probably have a 50% to 60% chance of dying. His soul would be destroyed, and he would die a violent death. It was easy to imagine how terrifying it was. If such a calamity could endlessly increase the number of false saints in this world and endlessly increase the power of the high level of this world, how could they survive it? In fact, the 30% chance that Luo Fan had calculated previously was already included. That also included the act of nurturing false saints as much as possible. With a slight thought, Luo Fan didn't pick a day or place. He sat cross-legged in this void and slowly began to explain the Tao of false saints to this world. False saints, to the current him, no longer had any secrets at this level. In these 300 million years, if an ordinary cultivator wanted to break through to the false saint realm from nothing, the possibility was naturally rather small. In fact, it could even be said to be almost impossible. However, with Luo Fan's current understanding of the Tao of false saints, even if he was only a level 1 false saint now, he still had a chance to become a false saint. The Tao of false saints seeped directly into the great Tao of this world. The laws were like an open broadcast. As long as any living being had the heart and grasped the method, they could enter and listen to the contents of his speech and absorb the principles within. In an instant, a subtle change occurred in this world. All the living beings in this world felt an indescribable satisfaction and doubt fill their hearts. Countless cultivators had tears streaming down their faces as they knelt in the direction of Luo Fan. They kowtowed to thank Luo Fan for his great kindness in preaching the Tao. After that, they were extremely pious and touched their spiritual thoughts. They began to listen to Luo Fan's sermon. This time, Luo Fan lectured on the Tao for a full 1,000 years. Only then did he stop. In these 1,000 years, no false saint in this world could break through the limit and break through to the false saint level. However, in the 100 years after Luo Fan stopped lecturing, false saints broke through the limit one after another and became false saints. They were as dense and fast as bamboo shoots after the rain. After 100 years, the number of cultivators who became false saints continued to decrease, but they still appeared from time to time. It was not until 100,000 years later that this trend completely disappeared. Finally, no cultivators could become false saints anymore. Obviously, 100,000 years had already used up the accumulation of Luo Fan's previous 1,000 years of Tao preaching. And in this short period of time, the number of false saints in this world had increased by nearly 1,000. Compared to the number of false saints that originally existed in this world, it was not considered a small number. After 100,000 years, he sensed that the residual influence of his Tao preaching had completely disappeared. Luo Fan began his second Tao preaching. This time, he was still talking about the Tao of false saints. However, this time, it was from a completely different perspective from the first preaching. Even those false saints would gain a lot from listening to his Tao preaching, let alone those cultivators who had yet to become false saints. Just like that, another 1,000 years later, Luo Fan stopped lecturing and began to give the living beings time to absorb the Tao he preached. Just like after his first preaching, in the next 100 years, false saints broke through the limit and became false saints. In the following 100,000 years, it was much slower than after the preaching, but there were still false saints breaking through the limit and becoming false saints. In the end, the number of false saints in this world increased by nearly 1,000. The accumulation of the second preaching was completely used up. After that, It was the third preaching, the fourth preaching, the fifth preaching. Every lecture would last for 1,000 years. And the interval between the two preaching was also 100,000 years. The first 100 Tao sermons were able to increase the number of false sages in this world by close to 1,000 each time.